There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I've been running combines across the western plains of North Dakota for near 15 years now. Long seasons of dust, the drone of engines, wheat swaying in the wind like an endless yellow ocean. It's a lonely job, but one that has its rhythm. The cab becomes a world of its own, a box of rattling metal, glass, and the steady hum of machinery. Out there, it's just you, the crop, and the horizon. And the horizon has a way of reminding you just how small you are. It was late August when it happened, harvest season, with skies stretched wide open, the air smelling of cut stalks and dry soil. The sun was setting low and red, flattening everything into silhouettes. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a man, standing straight in the wheat about 300 yards out. Too far for details, but the figure was tall, upright, still. I figured it was nothing, someone from another farm, a worker checking a fence, maybe even a hunter out early for deer. But kept cutting row after row, and when I glanced back, the figure hadn't moved. The strangest part? No matter how far the combine rolled forward, no matter how many acres I chewed through, it was always there, the same distance away. Always just at the edge of where the wheat bent into the horizon, perfectly framed by the fading light. At first, I told myself it was fatigue. When you're out here long enough, the heat and monotony play tricks on your eyes. Shadows merge, your depth perception dulls. But the longer I stared, the more I realized this was no mirage. This thing, this figure, wasn't bound by the rows I cut or the wheels I drove. It stayed with me. The next night, it was there again. Same place. Same distance. I tried to test it. Slowed the machine to a crawl, then sped it up, turned off into another block of fields entirely. Still, when I looked up, it was waiting. Unmoving, patient. You'd think a man would wave, call out, maybe even walk over to see what I was doing. Out here, folks know each other, and if a stranger is standing in your wheat, you sure as hell want to know why. But this one never shifted. Didn't raise an arm, didn't tilt a head, just stood there, half swallowed by grain and shadow. By the third evening, I started dreading sundown. During the day, the land feels honest. You can see everything from miles away, nothing but wheat and sky. But when the sun starts dropping, the light stretches thin, and the fields feel different. They change. The air cools fast, the insects quiet down, and there's this sensation like the land itself is holding its breath. That's when the figure would show. And I began to notice details I wish I hadn't. It wasn't just standing, it was too tall, a head and shoulders above the stalks, but the wheat in that section was thick and high, nearly to my chest when I'd walked it earlier in the season. The proportions weren't right either. Arms too long, torso too narrow, the silhouette stretched just enough that your brain balks at it. The human mind likes symmetry, familiarity. This was off. The real test came when I stopped the combine altogether. I killed the engine, stepped out into the field, and just listened. At first, only the sound of the wind brushing the wheat heads, then something else, a rhythm. Not quite footsteps, not quite the sway of grass, more like a slow shifting, as though the field itself were moving in anticipation. When I looked back up, the figure was still there, same distance, perfectly framed by twilight. Sleep became a stranger that week. I'd finish the shift, park the machine by the shed, and crawl into the RV we used as a bunkhouse near the tree line. The RV had been parked out there for years, a place for me or any seasonal workers to crash instead of driving into town every night. Normally, it felt safe. The hum of the fridge, the scratch of wind against the siding, the faint diesel smell from the equipment yard. But after seeing that figure, the walls felt thin, like the wheat could press right through the seams. I'd lie in the bunk listening for it, and I swear some nights I heard something pacing outside. Not boots, not deer hooves, something dragging just a little too long between steps. By dawn, there'd be nothing. Just dew on the stalks and the same endless gold expanse, quiet and innocent in the daylight. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? Out here, folks are tough, practical. You start talking about shadows in the wheat, and people think the sun's baked your brain. But I couldn't keep it in forever. One morning, over coffee at the co-op, I mentioned it to an older guy named Ray. He'd been farming the area his whole life, knew every ditch and fence line. You ever seen anyone standing out in the wheat at dusk? Tall fella, always seems too far to reach? I asked, trying to sound casual. Ray's face changed just for a second. A flicker, like he knew exactly what I meant, but wished I hadn't asked. Then he shrugged it off. Nothing out there but wheat and coyotes. Maybe you need more sleep. But later, as I was leaving, he caught me by the arm and muttered low, "Don't look at it too long. Don't let it follow you home." He wouldn't explain, just walked away. That night, I couldn't resist testing it again. The sun dipped low, shadows pulled long, and there it was, still waiting. I stopped the combine, climbed down, and walked a dozen yards into the wheat. The stalks closed around me, brushing against my jeans, their dry rustle loud against the silence. I never closed the distance. No matter how far I stepped, it kept its ground, always the same span away, like the horizon itself bent to keep it fixed. But as the light drained, I noticed something new. When the wind swept across the field, every stalk bent westward. Every stalk except those surrounding the figure. That patch remained upright, as if sealed in stillness. The wheat refused to move around it, like it wasn't part of this world. The fear hit me then, not the kind that makes you run, but the deep, gnawing kind that crawls into your bones and whispers, "You are prey." I turned back fast, stumbled to the combine, and didn't look behind me again. From then on, I tried to avoid dusk altogether. I'd push my shifts earlier, keep my eyes fixed on the rows ahead. But the thing about the plains, there's no hiding from the horizon. And when the sun slips low, the land becomes a stage, and every shadow has its cue. I saw it at least a dozen more times that harvest, always at distance, always patient. I never saw it approach, never saw it leave. One moment the wheat was empty, the next it was there. I started noticing other things too. Birds wouldn't fly near that section of the field. The radio in the cab would pick up static every evening at the same time, a crackling hiss that cut through whatever station I had on. And sometimes when the wind died down, I thought I heard clicking, like two stones tapping together, faint but deliberate. And then came the night it broke the rule. I was closing up late, headlights cutting narrow beams through the stalks, when I looked up and saw it closer than ever before. Not at the horizon this time, just beyond the reach of the lights. A silhouette sharp against the beams, frozen mid-step. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. The machine rattled to silence. The figure didn't move, didn't fade back to its distance. It was watching. And I swear, though the night was silent, I heard breath. Slow, steady, matching mine until I couldn't tell which lungs belonged to me. That was the moment I realized it wasn't bound to the fields. It had chosen me. I pulled the curtains tight, locked the door, and sat at the little table with the lights on, just listening. The fridge hummed. The wind brushed against the siding. My pulse kept mistaking those sounds for footsteps. I tried to read, tried to distract myself, but every time I glanced at the window, I expected to see a face. No, not a face, but that silhouette, pressed against the glass. Sleep was impossible. I dozed in and out, but when I did, the dreams were worse than the waking. I saw the field stretching out forever, wheat taller than my head, and somewhere inside it, something moving with me, matching my pace. The sound of dry stalks brushing against my clothes became the sound of something brushing against its body. Always behind me, always, just far enough that I couldn't turn to see. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my boots and walked out into the pale morning light, hoping that seeing the emptiness of the field would ease my mind. And it did for a moment. Just wheat, endless and gold, dew shining on every head. Nothing but the call of a distant meadowlark. But when I circled back toward the RV, I noticed something I'd missed in the haze of exhaustion. Tracks. Not boot prints, not deer hooves. Just two deep impressions in the soil, spaced too far apart for any man, pressed straight into the earth where the wheat stalks had been broken. Each step crushed plants flat, like weight had been distributed wrong, like it didn't walk the way we do. The trail ended about 20 yards from the RV. Then nothing. No return path, no continuation, just gone. I didn't tell Ray. I didn't tell anyone. The days blurred together after that. The harvest doesn't wait for fear. You keep driving the rows, keep filling the bins because the wheat won't cut itself. But the figure was always there, just waiting for the sun to tilt. I tried the radio again, scanning through static. Occasionally, I'd pick up faint voices. Not stations, not music, just fragments, like a man muttering in the distance, too garbled to catch the words. Sometimes I thought it said my name. Other times, I swore I heard laughter. The smell came next. I noticed it first in the combine cab, a sudden chemical tang, sharp and unnatural, like antifreeze mixed with copper. It filled my nostrils, made me gag. I checked every hose, every reservoir, nothing leaking, nothing wrong. The smell wasn't in the machine, it was in the air, and it came only at dusk, only when the figure appeared. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I was going to confront it. The sun was dropping, the figure already there at its usual distance. I cut the engine, climbed down, and walked straight toward it. My boots crunched on the stubble, my breath sharp in the cooling air. The figure stayed where it was, dark and tall against the last light. I kept moving, 50 yards, 40, 30, and then something strange happened. The ground seemed to change. My legs felt heavier, like I was climbing a slope, though the land was flat as a board. The wheat thickened, stalks knotting together, tugging at my jeans. My breath grew ragged, not from exertion, but from a pressure in the air itself, like the atmosphere had weight. When I stopped to catch myself, the figure was still 30 yards away, always 30 yards. No matter how far I went, I shouted then. My voice cracked across the emptiness. "What do you want?" The wheat bent, not with the wind, not with any pattern I knew. It bent inward toward the figure, like the entire field was bowing to it. That was enough. I turned and stumbled back toward the combine, the wheat snapping against me. I didn't look back until I was in the cab with the doors sealed, and when I did, the figure was gone. I didn't run the combine the next night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the RV, lights off, just staring out at the field. The moon hung low, silvering the wheat. For hours there was nothing, just stillness. I almost convinced myself it had been in my head. But then I saw movement, not the figure this time. Something else. The wheat rippled in a wide arc like something massive sliding just beneath the surface, bending the stalks as it passed. It circled once around the RV, slow, deliberate, then stopped. I sat frozen at the table, afraid even to breathe. And then from somewhere just outside came a sound I'll never forget. A voice. My voice. "Let me in." I felt bile rise in my throat. It wasn't perfect. There was something hollow in it, like an echo stretched too thin, but it was me. My own tone, my own cadence. The door handle rattled once. Then silence. I didn't move until dawn. The next day, I drove into town, ready to tell someone, anyone, what I'd seen. But every time I opened my mouth, the words dried up. What could I say? That something in the wheat was mimicking me? That a shadow followed me but never closed the distance? I ended up sitting at the diner for an hour, staring at my coffee before heading back out. When I returned, the RV was different. Nothing obvious at first. The door was locked, the windows unbroken. But when I stepped inside, the air felt wrong. Heavier, warmer, like someone had just been sitting there breathing. And the curtains I'd drawn tight that morning were open, every single one. I left the lights on after that, even during the day. The worst night came a week later. Storms were rolling in, clouds stacked black on the horizon, wind whipping the wheat into frantic waves. I knew I should have parked and waited it out, but something in me pushed to keep running the machine. Maybe I thought the noise would keep my mind occupied. Lightning cracked across the plains, lighting everything in jagged white. And in those flashes, I saw the figure, closer now, far closer than ever before. Not 30 yards. 10. Every time the lightning struck, it had moved. A still frame closer. First at the edge of the lights, then at the row I just cut, then right beside the cab. And when the lights died between strikes, I could feel it, the weight of it, the sense that something was staring through the glass. I killed the combine and bolted. Rain hammered down, thunder rolling, and I sprinted blind through the wheat until the RV loomed ahead. I dove inside, slammed the door, and locked it. The storm howled around me, but underneath the thunder, underneath the wind, I heard it, clicking. Slow, deliberate, like stones tapping together, circling the RV. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe exhaustion finally won. But when I woke, the storm was gone. The morning sun shone bright, the field calm and innocent again, except for one thing. On the table, beside the coffee mug I'd left the night before, lay a single stalk of wheat, cut clean. I didn't put it there. I left the plains after that season, sold the equipment, packed the RV, and got out. People asked why, and I gave excuses, said the market was bad, said I was tired of the isolation. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't look at a wheat field without feeling eyes on me. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself staring at open fields when I'm driving. And every so often, I think I see it again. Not clear, not close, just a shape standing too still, too tall, at the far edge of the horizon. And when the wind picks up, I swear I hear it. The faint clicking, just under the noise. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. But I know this, some things in the wheat aren't meant to be harvested. And they don't stop watching. I thought distance would be enough. I sold off the acres, took contract work down south, and avoided the plains altogether. When folks asked, I said I was just tired of North Dakota winters. But the truth is, I couldn't stand the sight of wheat. Even a passing field from the highway would set me on edge. The color, the movement, the way the stalks seemed to sway in patterns only I noticed. I worked odd jobs, operating machinery, hauling loads, even some timber clearing in the mountains. Those places had their dangers too. Avalanches, chainsaw kickback, bears that wandered too close. But none of it carried the same weight of dread. Bears you could see. Avalanches you could hear. This thing in the wheat had been neither. It was patient, and patience in the wilderness is worse than any predator. Years passed. I started to think maybe I'd shaken it, that maybe it had been some trick of exhaustion, the harvest heat, my own mind spiraling out in isolation. I let myself believe that. Until one fall, working contract out in eastern Montana, I stayed in an RV park just off the interstate. The lot backed onto open land. Not wheat this time, prairie grass, short and windblown, nothing tall enough to hide a thing. I felt safe there, until one morning, stepping out with my coffee, I saw it, not the figure, not yet, but a single stalk of wheat, lying on the ground, bright against the short prairie grass, no fields within miles, no farms close enough for wind to carry it. I froze, mug trembling in my hand, and that's when I realized the sound, not wind, not insects, a faint clicking from the tree line beyond the park. Sleep became an enemy again. Every creak of the RV, every brush of wind against the siding sent me upright in the bunk. My body remembered before my mind could reason it away. And then, late one night, I woke to a sound I'd prayed never to hear again. My own voice. Let me in. Same hollow echo, same cadence. This time, closer. I stayed frozen in the bunk, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. The handle rattled once, twice, then stopped. I thought that was the end of it, but in the morning, when I finally worked the courage to open the door, I saw impressions in the soil leading away from the RV. 2 long, deep steps, far too wide for a man. I left Montana within the week, kept moving from contract to contract, never staying near fields, never near open plains. But it didn't matter. Once you've been marked by something like that, distance is just a word. In Oregon, working trail clearing with a saw crew, I found wheat heads tucked into the pockets of my jacket, though I hadn't carried them. In Wyoming, camping out for a forestry survey, I woke to find stalks laid in a ring around the tent. In Colorado, a crackling came over the crew radio one night, a faint voice under the static repeating my name, and always beneath it all, the clicking. Slow, deliberate, stones knocking together just out of sight. I started drinking harder after that. You'd think confessing it would help, but telling anyone only brought laughter or concerned looks. Even Ray, the one man who might have known something, passed away a few winters back. Took whatever knowledge he had with him, so I carried it alone. Until one night, sitting at a bar in a small town along the Nebraska line, I overheard a rancher talking. He mentioned seeing a tall shape at the edge of his pastures, just standing still. Said no matter how close he drove, it never got closer. My skin went cold. I asked him about it. Tried not to sound desperate. He laughed it off at first, but when I pressed, his face tightened. "You've seen it too, then." That's all he'd say. Wouldn't meet my eyes after that. Left without finishing his drink. That's when I knew it wasn't just me. Whatever it is, it roams these plains, watching different men, testing who notices, who looks too long. And once you see it, really see it, it doesn't leave you. I don't know what it wants. Maybe it's not about want at all. Maybe it's just about being seen. About standing at the edge of vision until your mind breaks trying to define it. Maybe it waits for the moment you lose trust in your own eyes, in your own thoughts. That's when it takes its step forward. I don't have proof, not the kind anyone would believe. No photos, no recordings, only the memories, the figure at the horizon, the smell in the cab, the mimicry of my own voice. But I'll tell you this. If you're ever out on the plains at dusk, running a machine through the fields and you see something tall and still at the edge of the light, don't watch it. Don't test it. Don't listen when it calls. Because once it's chosen you, once the wheat bends to its stillness, it will follow. Even now, years later, living far from those fields, I wake in the night to silence too deep to trust. Sometimes I hear the faintest tap, 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 like stones knocking together beneath the floor, and some mornings, when I open the door to fetch the paper, there's a stalk of wheat lying in the dew. Fresh, golden, cut clean. I don't know how long it plans to wait, but it's watching, always watching. And one day, it will want me to step out into the field again. I never thought sound could betray me. When I was younger, camping had always been about silence, the stillness of the woods, the quiet hum of crickets at night, the gentle rush of a creek in the distance. It was silence that gave me peace, that made me feel like I was escaping the rest of the world. But when I took my RV into the Adirondacks that fall, it wasn't silence I learned to fear. It was the sound of my own voice, echoing back at me, long after I had stopped speaking. My name's Daniel. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in western Pennsylvania, where the Allegheny forests taught me how to love the outdoors. I've been taking RV trips since my mid-20s, whenever I felt like life had gotten too heavy, too filled with screens and deadlines and obligations. I'm not one of those survivalist types, though. I don't camp to prove anything. I camp because it's the only way I know to breathe again. That year, I had just gone through a breakup that left me hollow. 6 years of living with someone, planning futures, mapping out a life, and in a matter of weeks, it had all unraveled. Friends told me to get back into the dating pool, to distract myself, to drink it off. I didn't want any of that. I wanted solitude, the kind that only the woods could offer. So I packed up my RV with the bare essentials: food, lanterns, firewood, and enough propane to last me a week. And I drove north into New York, into the Adirondack Park. If you've ever been there, you know what I mean when I say it doesn't feel like the rest of the world. The forests are thicker, the peaks jagged and gray, the lakes dark and still like mirrors for something you don't quite want to see. The air even smells different there, sharper, like wet stone and pine needles. And when you camp in the Adirondacks in the fall, you feel like the entire world is folding in on itself, the leaves collapsing into fire, the cold creeping down from the mountains, the nights stretching longer and longer. I had chosen a campground a little off the beaten path near a trail called Cascade Pond. It wasn't one of the heavily trafficked sites, which is what I wanted. Fewer people, fewer interruptions. I pulled in on a gray afternoon, parked the RV between two towering maples, and stepped outside to take in the air. It was colder than I expected, my breath already visible, but it felt good. Honest. For the first day, nothing seemed unusual. I set up my small fire pit, unpacked, and went walking along the trail with a thermos of coffee. The woods were quiet, save for the occasional crack of a branch under a squirrel's weight. That first night, I sat by the fire, letting the flames warm my face, listening to the shifting night creatures in the distance. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. But the next day, everything began to shift. I was hiking back from Cascade Pond, where I'd spent the late morning fishing, when it happened. I stubbed my boot on a rock, cursed under my breath, and a moment later, I heard it, my own voice, the word I had just muttered, flung back at me from the woods. That in itself wasn't strange. Sound echoes all the time in mountains and valleys, but this wasn't the hollow bounce of an echo. It was clear, sharp, like someone standing just far enough away had repeated the word with my exact voice. I froze. The forest around me was empty. I scanned the trees, the underbrush, the trail behind me. Nothing. Just the wind shaking a few leaves loose. My rational brain told me it was the mountains. Maybe a rock face had thrown my voice back in a way I wasn't used to. But something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. I shook it off and kept walking. But a mile later, it happened again. This time, I called out on purpose. Hello? My voice rang through the trees, and sure enough, a second later, hello came back. Same pitch, same tone, same inflection. The problem was, it didn't stop there. I went quiet. My voice had only echoed once, but the reply kept going. Hello? 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 Each repetition a little softer, as though drifting further into the woods, carried off into some unseen corridor. I can't explain the feeling in my chest right then. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even fear at first. It was wrongness, like hearing someone call your name in a place they shouldn't know you exist. Like realizing the world isn't following its rules anymore. I stood there, my breath clouding in front of me, my ears straining for some other sign of life. But all I heard was the echo fading until it was swallowed by the silence of the forest. I didn't call out again. That night, I built my fire bigger than I usually did. I sat close to it, staring into the flames, trying to convince myself it had been nothing more than an odd acoustic trick. But every time the logs shifted, every time the fire popped, my head jerked up, half expecting to hear my own voice again. Sleep didn't come easy in the RV. I left the blinds cracked, watching the black shapes of trees shift in the night wind. I kept thinking about how the echo hadn't sounded natural, how it had felt alive, as though it wanted to keep me talking, to keep pulling more from me. I reminded myself that I'd come here for solitude, that fear was just my mind filling the emptiness with shadows. But even then, I kept the lantern burning low until dawn. The next morning, I told myself I wasn't going to let it rattle me. People hear weird things in the woods all the time. Tree knocks, fox screams that sound like humans, owls that mimic voices. It was easier to believe in an animal than to believe in whatever my imagination was cooking up. So I made coffee, tightened my laces, and took a different trail. But the woods don't forget what you bring into them. Halfway up the ridge, as I stopped to catch my breath, I muttered to myself, "Don't be stupid." And there it was again. Don't be stupid. Except this time, it didn't fade. The voice kept repeating, softer and softer, carried through the pines like a warning I wasn't meant to ignore. My own words, my own tone, but coming from somewhere I couldn't see. And that was when the denial started to slip. I tightened my grip on the hiking pole until my knuckles ached, staring into the trees. The forest around me looked the same, tall pines, the slope of the ridge, scattered patches of sunlight, but everything inside me screamed that it wasn't the same. The echo kept trailing off, softer, as if someone with my voice was walking away while whispering it. Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. It wasn't how echoes behaved. Echoes fade evenly, a sharp return that dies all at once. This was staggered, stretched, like someone wanted me to follow. I told myself to turn around to head back to camp, but I didn't. Not yet. Something in me wanted to prove I wasn't rattled. I pushed forward on the trail, every footstep crunching louder than it should have. My breathing sounded wrong, too. Every exhale scraped against the air like it was being swallowed before it could escape. At one point, I said my name aloud, quietly, Daniel, and the forest answered, Daniel. But instead of fading, it split. The first echo was sharp, immediate, normal. But then came another, a half second later. Then another, farther still. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. Each one drifting deeper into the woods, carrying my name away. I don't remember moving at first, but suddenly I was walking faster, boots sliding against the dirt, pack bouncing on my shoulders. I felt hunted, not by an animal, but by something that knew me, something that wanted me to listen to myself until I lost the thread of who I was. By the time I stumbled back into the campsite, the sun was already tilting low. I sat on the RV steps, lungs heaving, sweat cooling under my jacket despite the sharp chill. I told myself not to speak again, not outside, not where the woods could take it from me. I kept my mouth shut the rest of the evening, eating in silence, feeding the fire in silence. But silence didn't save me. Around midnight, when the fire had burned down to coals, I heard it again, my own voice. Except I hadn't spoken. It came from the tree line, soft but distinct. Don't be stupid. I froze on the RV bed, every muscle locked. The voice was perfect. My pitch, my tone, even the exhaustion behind it. And then it said my name, like I had earlier on the ridge. Daniel. It wasn't echoing me anymore, it was choosing. The sound crawled closer, drifting between the trees, never loud enough to pin to a spot, just near enough to keep me awake, to keep my ears straining for the next syllable. At one point it said, hello, again, the same way I had days before. And again it repeated, hello, 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 carrying itself deeper until I wanted to scream just to stop it, but I didn't. I couldn't. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined stepping outside and finding my own face waiting in the woods, lips moving in the dark. The morning should have felt like relief, but it didn't. The light didn't drive it away. If anything, the pale gray sun only made the woods feel emptier, like they were holding a secret I couldn't reach. I drank coffee with shaking hands, telling myself I'd pack up and drive out, but some stubborn part of me hesitated. I didn't want to leave out of fear. I lingered, and that was my mistake. Later that afternoon, I walked down toward the pond again. The air smelled heavy, metallic, like rain was about to fall, though the sky was clear. The further I walked, the more I noticed how sound carried. My footsteps didn't just crunch, they multiplied, bouncing back wrong, too quick, like someone else's steps overlapping mine. I stopped and listened. The forest stopped too. That was when I realized I hadn't heard a bird all day. No squirrels, no insects, just me. And then, not me, a voice whispered behind me, Daniel. I spun around. Nothing. No trail, no movement, just a slope of trees falling away into shadow. I whispered back before I could stop myself, who's there? The reply came instantly in my voice, who's there? Then again, who's there? Who's there? Who's there? Each one weaker, smaller, drifting off like a candle flame pulled down a tunnel. I stood rooted to the trail, chest heaving, throat dry, until the last whisper vanished. And then, for the first time, I let panic win. I ran. Branches clawed at my jacket. Rocks turned under my boots, but I didn't care. I just wanted to hear silence again, even if silence wasn't safety. I didn't stop until I was back at the RV, hands trembling so bad I dropped the keys twice before shoving them into the lock. I sat inside, lights on, blinds drawn, waiting for something, anything to break the stalemate. But the woods didn't knock. The woods didn't move. The woods just repeated, again and again in my head, my own voice calling me into the dark. And that was when the doubt started to take root, because I couldn't tell anymore if I was really hearing it or if I was just unraveling piece by piece, listening to the echoes in my mind. I told myself it had to be exhaustion. I hadn't really slept in 2 nights, not well. Maybe my brain was making things up, weaving fragments of memory and fear into sounds that weren't there. But even as I sat in the RV with the blinds drawn and the stove light humming, I knew that was a lie. What I had heard wasn't the random nonsense of a tired mind. It had pattern. It had intent. The problem with fear in a place like that is it doesn't stay outside. It creeps into your skin, fills the air you breathe, and soon you can't separate what's real from what your nerves are inventing. The Adirondacks are vast, and when you're alone inside them, you're a single fragile point surrounded by miles of silence. And silence doesn't forgive. I stayed put most of that day, refusing to hike again, pacing the narrow aisle of the RV like a caged animal. Every time I passed the window, I expected to see my own reflection staring back at me from the trees. At one point, I even considered leaving, just starting the engine and driving out without looking back. But I didn't. Why? Because fear has a way of twisting into stubbornness. I told myself I wouldn't let the woods scare me out. I'd finish my trip, stay until the end of the week, and prove to myself that nothing was happening. If I left, it would be like admitting the voice had power over me. But as night came again, so did the echo. It started faintly, around dusk, just as the firelight began to lose against the creeping dark. I heard my own laugh. I hadn't laughed all day, but there it was, drifting from the tree line. A soft chuckle, the exact rhythm of mine, as though someone had been recording me, waiting for the right time to play it back. I didn't move. I sat stiff at the fire, staring into the shadows where it had come from. Then another sound followed, my voice again saying words I hadn't spoken since arriving. I needed this. I had said it the first night, sitting by the fire in relief. Now it returned to me from the forest, mimicked, repeated, stretched thinner with each echo. I needed this. I needed this. I needed this. The flames flickered, and I swear for a moment the sound carried shapes with it, the shifting of branches not tied to wind. I couldn't take it anymore. I doused the fire, retreated into the RV, locked the door, and pulled the blinds tight. But inside wasn't safety either. As I lay on the bed, wrapped in a blanket that suddenly felt far too thin, the voice began again, closer now, pressing against the metal shell of the RV itself. It said my name, slowly, like a lure, Daniel. I pressed my hands against my ears, but sound has a way of slipping past barriers when it wants to. Daniel. This time, I answered. I don't know why. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was defiance. I whispered, "What do you want?" The reply came without pause. My own voice, perfect and sharp, only inches away. "What do you want?" My stomach dropped, because it wasn't just mocking me. It was asking too. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I lay there until dawn seeped gray through the cracks in the blinds, heart hammering so hard it felt like I'd been running all night. The next morning, I thought I might be free of it. The woods were damp with mist, and the air smelled of wet leaves and earth, grounding smells that should have comforted me. I stepped outside cautiously, breathing deep, trying to reset. The fire pit was cold, the trees innocent. But then, almost tenderly, from deep in the mist came a single word. Stay. My voice. I nearly dropped the mug I was holding. My first instinct was to deny it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But my body knew better. Every muscle tightened, every hair on my arm stood on end. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a trick of the air. The forest wanted me. And suddenly, leaving didn't feel like an option anymore. Because I realized with a cold clarity that seeped into my bones that the echoes weren't just repeating. They were learning. They were waiting. They had started by imitating. Then they borrowed words I had used before. Now they were making choices. And if they could choose, then they could want. The echo that didn't stop wasn't an echo at all. It was something alive. I set the mug down on the step, careful not to spill it, though my hands were trembling so badly the ceramic clinked against the metal. The mist hadn't lifted. It hung low between the trees like smoke, curling and folding, hiding the forest in pale sheets. Every sound seemed swallowed before it reached me. No birds, no insects, not even the drip of dew from the branches. Just the quiet. And under it, that single word replaying in my head, stay. I told myself to pack. To get into the RV, start the engine, and drive until the mist was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. I even opened the door, stepped inside, and reached for the ignition. My keys were in my hand, but when I tried to turn them, I couldn't. My fingers froze as if part of me didn't want to leave. That was the worst part. because I realized the echo had slipped inside me. It wasn't just out there anymore, bouncing in the trees. It was inside my thoughts, inside the rhythm of how I spoke to myself. I stayed. The hours bled together. I sat at the small table by the window, staring out at the fog while the propane stove hissed. My coffee went cold. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. Every so often I thought I heard it again, my voice, faint and muffled, drifting through the mist. Sometimes it said my name. Sometimes it whispered things I hadn't said aloud in years. I miss you. Don't go. Words that belonged to another time, another version of myself. By afternoon, I couldn't take the walls of the RV anymore. I stepped outside and walked toward the pond. The mist parted just enough to show me the trail, though it felt narrower than before, the trees closing in on either side. My boots crunched against wet leaves, and for a moment that was all I heard. Then softly, "Daniel." I stopped dead. The sound didn't come from behind or from ahead. It came from everywhere at once, as if the forest itself had spoken. And then I heard footsteps, not mine. They were light, measured, following at a distance. I turned, expecting to see someone, a hiker, another camper, but the trail was empty. Mist swallowed everything more than a few feet away. I stood there waiting, the hair on my arms bristling. Then, clear as if whispered against my ear, came the words, "Don't be stupid." My own voice. Again, I broke. I didn't care about pride anymore, or proving I wasn't afraid. I turned and ran, crashing through the fog, barely keeping to the trail. Branches whipped my arms, wet leaves slapped against my face, but I didn't stop until the RV loomed out of the haze. I slammed the door shut behind me, locked it, pulled the curtains tight, and sat with my back pressed to the wall. My chest heaved, lungs burning. But the worst part was the silence after, because the longer I waited, the more I realized I wasn't sure if the footsteps had stopped at all. Maybe they were still out there, circling the RV, quiet now, patient. That night, the echo changed again. It didn't start outside, it started inside. I had dozed off. Finally, my head slumped against the wall when I woke to the sound of breathing. Slow, rhythmic, not mine. Then a whisper, "Daniel." I jerked upright, scanning the dark interior. No one was there. I was alone. But the voice had come from inside the RV, from the narrow aisle between the table and the bed. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. I wanted to shout, to drive it away, but my throat locked up. And then I heard it again, my voice, thick with sleep, as though it were speaking from my own body while I sat frozen. "Why are you afraid?" The words bled through the air, low and steady. I pressed back against the wall, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, no." The voice whispered back, "No, no, no." It wasn't repeating anymore. It was with me, breathing when I breathed, speaking when I didn't, curling itself around my thoughts like smoke until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. That was when the panic broke into something worse. The realization that maybe it didn't want to harm me. Maybe it wanted to be me. And in that moment, with the dark pressing against the RV and my own voice echoing where it didn't belong, I realized something even more terrifying. If it was inside, there was nowhere left to run. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I must have, because I woke with my face pressed against the window and the taste of metal in my mouth, as if I'd been biting my tongue in my sleep. For a second, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. The echoes, the whispers, the breathing. But then I heard it. Morning. The word was casual, almost cheerful. And it was my voice. It came from outside the RV. My stomach dropped. My first instinct was to stay perfectly still, as if movement would confirm I was awake, that this was real. The sunlight was weak, spilling pale gold through the cracks in the blinds, but it was morning all the same. Things like this weren't supposed to happen in the daylight. I slid quietly from the bed, every muscle trembling, and peered through the narrow slit in the blinds. The trees stood motionless, their branches dripping with dew. Nothing moved. Nothing human, at least. Then it spoke again. "Come out." I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. It wasn't the word itself that terrified me. It was the tone, the command, There was weight behind it, like the forest itself had decided it was done waiting. My hand hovered over the RV door handle. For a split second, I almost listened. Not because I wanted to, but because something inside me leaned toward the sound, as though it had hooked into the softest part of my mind and tugged. I forced myself back, shaking, whispering under my breath, "No." And that was when I heard it whisper back from the other side of the wall. "No." I stumbled to the table, sat down hard, and buried my face in my hands. My chest heaved like I had run miles, even though I hadn't moved more than a few steps. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. The light shifted across the table. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. For a while it was quiet, almost normal. And then I heard footsteps. Soft, measured, circling the RV. My skin prickled as I tracked them, following the sound from one window to the next. They weren't heavy enough for boots, but they weren't light enough for deer. They were deliberate, human, except they weren't because I was still alone. Then came the knock, just one sharp and hollow against the side of the RV. I froze. Another knock, on the other side, then another at the back. It was circling me, tapping at the walls, like a child testing the shell of something fragile before deciding where to crack it open. I wanted to scream, to make some noise that would break the pattern, but the thought of hearing that scream thrown back at me, stretched, repeated, paralyzed me. I sat in silence as the knocks faded, swallowed by the trees, leaving me in a stillness worse than before. That night, I kept the lantern burning until the fuel nearly ran out. I sat upright in the corner of the RV, knees pulled tight to my chest, waiting. Every creak of the walls, every groan of the forest wind became a message I didn't know how to read. And then, sometime past midnight, it spoke again. This time, it didn't come from outside. It came from right behind me. "I can wait." The words were so close I felt my skin go cold, as if lips had brushed against my ear. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, but there was no one there. Just the narrow aisle of the RV, empty and dim in the glow of the lantern. But I knew. I knew then that the echo wasn't a mistake, wasn't a trick of sound. It had been following me from the first day, testing the edges of my voice, slipping deeper each time. And now it wasn't just waiting in the trees. It was inside the RV, inside me. I couldn't breathe. My throat felt closed, my chest like a cage that wouldn't expand. The words, "I can wait," were still ringing in my ears, my voice but not mine, curling around the corners of the RV like smoke. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, but even that felt wrong, like the table wasn't solid anymore, like it could vanish if I stopped holding on. I wanted to tell myself it was exhaustion again, that sleep deprivation was breaking my mind apart, but that excuse had worn thin. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't the brain inventing noises in the dark. The voice was using me. It had peeled my words off like bark from a tree and was wearing them back at me, molding itself closer each time. I sat there for hours, eyes darting between the door, the windows, the lantern that was starting to dim. The silence after that last whisper was unbearable, worse than the sounds themselves, because silence made me wait for it. Silence made me complicit. I don't remember deciding to do it, but suddenly I was standing at the RV door, my hand on the handle. My body moved before my mind did, as though something deeper inside me had chosen for me. I opened the door. The forest was black. Not just dark, but black. The mist from earlier burned away to reveal shadows that seemed thicker than they should have been. The fire pit sat cold and empty, surrounded by the same trees that had been here all week, but they looked different now, taller, closer, their branches reaching down like they wanted to pull me into them. I stepped outside. The air was dead still, no wind, no insects, no breath but mine. My boots sank slightly into the damp soil, and the sound of it, the wet squelch of mud, echoed too loud. And then it happened again. The echo didn't stop. The sound of my boots repeated, one step, two, then again and again, as if someone invisible was following directly behind me. I froze, but the steps didn't. They kept going, pacing me in the dark, circling me in wide arcs I couldn't track. And then came my voice. "Daniel." It was far at first, carried from the trees, then closer. Daniel. Then right behind me. Daniel. I spun, my breath tearing out of my chest, but there was no one there, just the black wall of the forest. Something inside me snapped. I screamed. Not words, not a sentence, just raw noise, the sound of every ounce of fear breaking out of me. And the forest answered. My scream came back once, then again, then a dozen times more. Some closer, some farther, each one staggered, layered, overlapping until it sounded like 100 versions of myself were howling at once. The ground seemed to shake with it, the trees trembling, the air vibrating in my lungs. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me now, rattling against my skull, filling my bones. I fell to my knees, dirt grinding into my palms as the echoes stretched and warped, turning my voice into something inhuman. Higher, lower, cracked, broken. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that doesn't just press against your ears, but against your thoughts, as if even your mind isn't allowed to make noise. I don't know how long I knelt there. Minutes, hours. It blurred together. But eventually I forced myself back into the RV, had slammed the door, and collapsed on the floor. I didn't light the lantern this time. I sat in the dark, shaking, eyes wide, ears straining for anything. And then, just as my breathing started to steady, it came again. But this time, the echo didn't come from outside. It came from my own mouth. I hadn't spoken. I swear I hadn't. My lips hadn't moved, but my voice filled the air in front of me, whispering words I didn't choose. Stay. The sound of it rattled my teeth, hollow and empty, like the woods had finally rooted themselves inside me. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was the one thinking anymore. I sat there in the dark, unable to move, waiting for the sound to return. My own whisper, stay, still hung in the air, even though I hadn't said it. The RV felt smaller than ever, the ceiling pressing down, the walls closing in, as if the whole structure was being pulled tighter around me. My hands trembled against my knees, my breath shallow and uneven, and every time I thought of speaking, I bit my tongue to keep it inside. I was afraid of what else might slip out if I opened my mouth. The hours crawled by. I counted the hums of the refrigerator, the ticks of the cooling engine, the faint creaks of the RV's frame shifting in the cold. At some point, the lantern sputtered out completely, leaving me in a dark darkness so complete I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. My chest ached with the weight of it. And then the voice came again. Not outside, not even from the air around me. It came from my own head, but louder than thought should ever be, like a second mind grafted onto mine. You can't leave. I flinched, my skull pounding as if the words had been hammered inside. I wanted to argue, to tell it I could leave, but the instant I thought it, the echo spoke it too. I could leave. Hearing my own defiance stolen from me broke something. My thoughts weren't mine anymore. They were being echoed back, twisted, repeated until I couldn't tell if I was thinking them or if the forest was planting them in me. I curled forward, pressing my forehead to the table, whispering to myself, "Don't listen, don't listen." And the echo purred, "Don't listen, don't listen." It had me. By dawn, my mind felt stripped raw. I staggered outside into the pale light, my eyes burning from sleeplessness, the ground still slick with dew. The forest seemed calm again, like nothing had ever happened. Mist hung between the trees, soft and weightless. For a moment, I let myself believe I could just start the RV, drive out, and never look back. I climbed into the cab, shoved the keys into the ignition, and turned. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Relief poured through me, loud, mechanical, real. But then I heard it. Through the rattling of the engine, cutting sharp and clear, came my voice. "Don't go." I gripped the wheel tighter. My foot hovered over the gas. Again, "Don't go." It was louder this time, almost pleading, and then it multiplied. A chorus of my own voice erupted from the trees, dozens of Daniels overlapping, desperate, demanding, "Don't go, don't go, don't go." Some were high, some low, some cracked, some whispered. The sound was so thick it rattled the glass, pressed against the metal walls of the RV until the whole vehicle vibrated with it. I jammed my foot on the gas, the tires spun, flinging mud, but the road out was narrow, slick, and winding. The trees pressed close on either side, their shadows lashing across the windshield as I sped forward, but the voices followed. They didn't fade with distance. They grew louder, closer, chasing me like a storm. Every bend in the road carried another wave of sound. My voice screamed, begged, laughed, cried, all at once. The RV shuddered with the weight of it, and I realized that no matter how fast I drove, I wasn't outrunning it, because the echo wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the engine's roar, inside the tires grinding dirt, inside the pounding of my own heart. And as the road narrowed, winding deeper into the Adirondacks instead of out, a thought broke through all the noise, one that wasn't mine, but that I heard as clearly as if I had spoken it. You'll never leave. And the silence that followed was worse than everything that had come before. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy with something waiting. My hands clutched the wheel so tight the skin along my knuckles split and bled, but I couldn't let go, couldn't loosen my grip. The road beneath me blurred, each curve melting into the next, and I realized with a sinking weight in my chest that I no longer recognized where I was. I had studied the map before I left. I had marked my route, knew exactly how to get in and how to get out. But now every bend in the dirt road felt like a mirror of the last, every tree a copy of the ones before it. I checked the compass clipped to the dash. It spun lazily, directionless, no matter how I turned. Keep driving, a voice whispered. My voice. It slipped through the roar of the RV's engine, subtle, coaxing. I tried to tell myself it was just in my head, but the longer I drove, the more insistent it became. Keep driving. The steering wheel fought me, the tires pulling toward a track I hadn't chosen. My arms burned from holding the line, forcing the RV forward, resisting whatever wanted to steer me deeper into the trees. I told myself if I just kept pushing, I'd break through. I'd find pavement, a sign, another camper, something human. But what I found was the lake. I don't know how I reached it. One moment, the forest pressed on either side, and the next it opened into a wide clearing where the water spread out like a black sheet of glass. Mist clung low across its surface, drifting in strange, uneven shapes. The road ended right at the shoreline as if it had been built to deliver me here, no further. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded in the mud, stopping just short of the water. My chest heaved, my pulse hammering so hard it blurred my vision. I half expected the echoes to rise again, to scream and howl and demand I turn back. But instead, there was only that waiting silence. I killed the engine. The sudden absence of its growl left my ears ringing, and in that ringing I could hear the lake itself, or maybe not the lake, but something that used it. A hollow, low sound like voices carried underwater. I stumbled out of the cab, boots sinking in the mud, and walked toward the shore. The mist shifted, and then I heard it. Not behind me, not above me. From the center of the lake carried clear and strong across the water. Daniel. My name. In my voice. It echoed once, twice, then didn't stop. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. A dozen, 100 versions of me, all rolling over each other, each one a little louder, a little closer, until it felt like they were calling from inside my own chest. I dropped to my knees at the water's edge, clutching at my ears, but it didn't matter. The voices weren't in the air anymore. They were in me. I screamed, desperate to drown them out, but the sound was stolen the instant it left my throat. My scream echoed back, then split, multiplied, became an unending chorus of my own agony. And when the echoes finally fell silent, I heard just one voice left. Calm, measured, my own. You're home now. And the worst part was, I almost believed it. I staggered backward from the shoreline, mud sucking at my boots, lungs fighting for air that suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. The lake didn't ripple, not even where my voice had torn through it, as though it wasn't water at all, but a mirror stretched flat over the earth. My reflection didn't look right. The mist bent the outline of my face, dragging it long, smudging it, until it seemed like someone else entirely was crouched at the water's edge. I wanted to run, God, I wanted to turn back toward the road and never look at that lake again. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the road was gone. Not in the way a path can fade into trees or curve behind a ridge. It was simply not there. Behind me, where I had just driven, was nothing but endless forest. The RV still sat there, angled in the mud, headlights dimmed against the mist, but there was no road leading to it. No tire tracks, nothing to explain how I had arrived. The RV looked wrong too. At first it was just the shape. It seemed smaller, hunched, like it was caving inward. Then I saw the windows. They weren't reflecting the lake or the trees, they were reflecting me. Every pane, front to back, held my face, standing here at the water's edge. And in those reflections, my mouth was still moving. The sound rose behind me again. My name, repeating, overlapping itself until the syllables became meaningless. Daniel. 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 But it wasn't coming from the lake anymore. It was spilling from the RV, from every window, from my other mouths. I stumbled toward it, not out of courage, but because I didn't know what else to do. My body moved like it had been pulled on strings. The closer I got, the clearer the voices became, until I could pick out slight differences. One said my name with the exact bitterness I'd felt in my worst moments. Another whispered it soft, like my mother had when I was a child. Another dragged it out low and guttural, like something savoring the sound. I reached the door. My hand shook as I touched the handle. Cold, not metal cold, but wet cold, like the skin of something that had been buried in snow. The voices hushed, all at once. And then from the dark inside came a single, unmistakable command. Come in. It was me who said it. I couldn't move. My throat locked, my legs buckled. Every instinct screamed to turn and run into the trees, but I knew what would happen if I did. The forest would just twist me back here again. The lake would wait. The RV would wait. And the voices, they would never stop. So I stepped inside. The air hit me first, thick, damp, like I was walking into a cave where something had been breathing for too long. The narrow hall glowed with the weak light of the overhead fixtures, but shadows pooled in every corner, shadows that shifted when I looked at them too long. And then I heard it again, my voice. Not from outside this time. From deeper inside the RV, it was speaking, slowly, patiently, and the words it said were not ones I had ever spoken. You'll never leave, Daniel, not until you listen. I froze in the narrow hall, every nerve in me straining like an animal cornered. The RV had never felt this long before. Every step forward stretched into an impossible distance. The air smelled of metal and mildew, like something rotting inside the walls. My own voice echoed faintly ahead, words I didn't recognize, but that carried my tone, my rhythm, like a stranger had worn my throat for years, and only now revealed itself. I edged forward, one hand trailing the paneling for balance, until I reached the small living space. The table was set, though I hadn't set it. Plates, silverware, a glass of water half full and trembling slightly as if someone had just put it down. And in the bench seat sat me, or what looked like me. The figure leaned forward, elbows on knees, chin cradled in its hands. The way I sit when I'm thinking too much, when the silence of a room presses too hard. But its face wasn't still. It rippled, like water trying to hold shape, features sliding, eyes never quite locking, and when its mouth opened, my voice poured out. You don't listen, Daniel. You never listen. I wanted to shout to deny it, but my throat had no strength. The figure continued, each word heavier than the last. You run from yourself, from the echo that follows you, but the echo doesn't go away. It waits. It grows. The sound of it burrowed into me. I realized then it wasn't just repeating things I'd said or things I might say. It was pulling from the parts of me I kept hidden, the guilt, the doubt, the words I thought but never dared to let out loud. I backed away, hitting the narrow wall, but there was no space to escape. The figure leaned closer, and I swear the entire RV tilted with its weight. You can leave the woods, Daniel. You can even leave this RV, but you'll never leave me, because I am you. I am every sound you thought died in the dark. Its face snapped into perfect clarity, my face grinning with a malice I had never worn. And then the lights died. The dark swallowed me whole, and the last thing I heard was my own voice, whispering from every wall, every surface, every place that could hold sound. The echo never stops. I've worn this badge for 22 years, long enough to know when a call doesn't sound right. In a county like ours, most calls are the same: domestics, drunks, wrecks on rain-slick roads. But when dispatch told me a farmer had called in about a road bleeding, I sat in silence longer than I should have. The words were delivered flat, no room for misinterpretation. Not oil, not transmission fluid, blood. It was early October, the kind of morning where fog sat in the hollows like a living thing, refusing to lift until noon. My cruiser cut through the mist, headlights throwing up pale cones that revealed nothing but more white drifting air. I kept the radio low. Static filled the gaps where the signal should have been clear, popping like knuckles against the silence. The location was an old service road out by Hickory Ridge. I'd driven it 100 times before, though never had reason to stop. It wasn't paved for much traffic anymore, just hunters, a few loggers, the occasional backwoods campers who didn't mind being off-grid. When I turned down the lane, gravel spitting beneath the tires, I saw the farmer's truck idling at the shoulder. He was outside already, a wiry man named Cray who ran cattle near the ridge. His eyes met mine before I even parked, and I could see the way he clutched his ball cap, turning it in his hands as if it were some kind of nervous ritual. "Sheriff," he said, his voice cracking, "you ain't gonna believe this." I followed him 20 feet down the road, and that's when I saw it. A wide, dark smear stretched across the asphalt. At first glance, it looked like someone had gutted a deer in the middle of the road and dragged it off. But the closer I leaned in, the stranger it seemed. The liquid wasn't just pooled. It was seeping, bubbling up through hairline cracks in the pavement as though the road itself was cut open. The smell hit next, copper and rot, sharp enough to make my stomach shift. I crouched low, pulled out a pen, and pressed the tip into the surface. The pen came up wet, dark red, thick, coagulated in places. "Where'd it come from?" I asked. Cray shook his head violently. "Didn't come from nowhere, just started coming up. Watched it with my own eyes, I did, like the ground's leaking." I stood there in silence, listening. Somewhere in the trees a crow barked, but closer, beneath my boots, there was a faint, rhythmic thump, almost like a pulse. I told myself it was the vibration of trucks on the highway, miles away. Told myself it was imagination. I radioed dispatch, asked them to send a highway crew for assessment. Static answered, then a garbled voice I couldn't make out. I tried again, same result, just broken syllables, like words chewed up before they reached me. I shut it off. "Go on home, Cray," I told the farmer, forcing a steadiness I didn't feel. "I'll handle it from here." He didn't argue, didn't even nod. Just backed away to his truck, climbed in, and drove off without another word. I stayed, staring at the dark, spreading stain. Something in me wanted to touch it with my bare hand to prove it was something ordinary. Paint, chemicals, anything but what my mind whispered. But I couldn't. Instead, I walked the road, tracing where the seepage had spread. The stains weren't isolated. Every 30 yards or so, new rivulets leaked from the cracks, as if the whole road had veins beneath it. Some places, the liquid ran toward the ditch, disappearing into weeds that already looked darkened, almost blackened. I crouched and pressed a finger to the soil there, wet, staining. And then, faint but undeniable, I heard it. A wet, sucking sound like a wound drawing air. I froze. The trees leaned in on both sides, thick with oak and pine, shadows stacked in layers that swallowed the light. The thought struck me suddenly. What if it isn't coming from underneath? What if it's coming through? I stepped back. My breathing quickened despite myself. For the first time in years, I wished I hadn't answered a call alone. That's when I saw it. 10 yards ahead, the stain thickened into a pool wide enough to cover both lanes, and at the center of that pool, the liquid was still moving, pushing upward, swelling like a blister on the earth's skin. I took one step forward, the gravel crunching under my heel. The blister broke. A spray of dark fluid hissed upward before collapsing back onto the asphalt, streaking across my boots. It was warm. warmer than fresh blood should have been. My throat closed as the copper stench filled my lungs. I stumbled back, cursing, scraping my boots against the gravel. And then, faint, almost lost beneath the buzz of insects and the far-off crow, a voice. It didn't come from behind me. It didn't come from the trees. It came from the road. Low, gurgling, words forming between the bubbles of liquid as it hissed and popped. My name. I'd never heard anything like it, but I knew what I heard. Sheriff. The word crawled out of the asphalt like something dragged from a grave. I froze, every muscle locked. My hand hovered near my sidearm, though what use a pistol would be against this I didn't know. My name again, clearer this time, as if the road itself had learned to shape the sound. I wanted to run. God knows I should have. But the oath I took, the badge on my chest, the stubborn pride of a man too long in charge of keeping order in a place that barely wanted order, I stayed, and the road kept bleeding. I stood there longer than I should have, boots stained, lungs tightening against the stench. The fog that had been clinging to the hollows was starting to roll across the road itself, pulled low and heavy like smoke. My cruiser sat 30 yards behind me, beacon of safety in the gray, but the thought of turning my back on that voice, on my own name leaking out of the pavement, felt like stepping into a trap. The blistered pool had flattened now, spreading slow like oil, but there was movement beneath it, as if something pressed against the underside of the blacktop. I crouched, forcing myself closer, every instinct screaming to retreat. The liquid hissed in tiny bubbles, and with each one, a vibration ticked up through the ground into my knees. I pressed a hand against the asphalt. Thump, thump, steady, rhythmic, a pulse. I staggered back upright. The radio on my belt squawked faintly, but instead of dispatch, it was only static, broken with sharp cracks like bones under weight. No voices now, just noise. My father used to tell me stories about roads in these hills, old native trails buried by logging routes, ghost paths that locals swore were cursed. I'd written them off as tales meant to keep kids from wandering too far. But standing there, fog thickening, the stench rising, I couldn't help remembering his voice saying, "The land remembers, boy. Sometimes it remembers wrong." I tried the radio again, my voice sounding thin even to me. "Unit 1 to dispatch. You copy?" Nothing, only static, then the faintest suggestion of laughter. Not loud, not joyful. A cracked sound, brittle as glass breaking. I ripped the radio from my vest and stared at it, my heartbeat matching the pulse beneath the ground. That's when I saw the drag marks. On the far shoulder of the road, just beyond the bleeding pool, the gravel was scored with lines. Wide, uneven trenches as though something heavy had been pulled across. I followed them with my eyes into the ditch where weeds bent low and darkened soil spread outward like bruises. Something had been dragged into the trees. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the undergrowth. The fog scattered the light, turning the beam into a halo that barely reached 20 feet. But in that pale glow, I saw a cloth snagged on a branch. Blue. Denim. I drew my sidearm without thinking. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I cleared it and tried again, louder. "This is the sheriff's department. Anyone out there?" Silence. Then, from deeper in the trees, something shifted. A scrape. Heavy, deliberate. My beam swung that way, trembling. Between the trunks, something pale flashed, a shape low to the ground, then gone. The bleeding pool behind me hissed louder. The smell thickened, sharp and sweet now like spoiled meat under sun. My boots felt glued in place. I forced myself back toward the cruiser, each step deliberate, like walking through water. Halfway there, the road beneath me cracked. A thin fissure snapped open between my boots, dark liquid spurting upward in a thin geyser. I jumped back, cursing, watching it arc across the road and splash into the ditch. The sound it made wasn't right. It didn't slap against leaves or soil. It hissed, like acid poured onto stone. The fissure widened. My cruiser sat 20 feet away, headlights dim through the fog, but the cracks stretched toward it, spreading like a vein across the asphalt. More liquid bubbled up, streaming in thin rivulets. I ran. Boots pounded gravel. The cruiser seemed farther with each stride, fog folding tighter around it. Behind me, the fissure split again, branching outward like a tree root spreading underground. The hiss followed me, louder, closer. I reached the driver's side and yanked the handle. Locked. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, breath coming ragged. When the lock finally popped, I dove inside and slammed the door shut. For a moment, silence. My own ragged breathing. The ticking of the engine cooling. I shoved the key in, twisted, and the cruiser roared to life. Headlights cut through the fog, twin spears of weak light. The road ahead shimmered. The bleeding fissures ran across it like veins on the back of a hand, pulsing faintly in the glow. For one wild second, I thought the entire stretch of pavement was alive. I dropped the car into reverse. The tires spun against wet gravel before catching, lurching me backward. The fissures split wider in the rearview mirror, red-black liquid splashing against the cruiser's undercarriage. The smell filled the cabin, so thick I gagged. Then voices. Not one, not two. A chorus, rising through the static of the radio, through the hiss of the fissures, through the roar of my engine. Voices calling from the road, from the trees, from the fog itself. They weren't saying words I understood, not at first. Just murmurs, layers upon layers, until one phrase cut through like a blade. Don't leave. I floored the gas. Gravel sprayed. The cruiser shot backward down the road, bouncing over potholes, fog splitting only to close behind me like a curtain. The voices followed, faint but insistent, braided into the thumping pulse beneath the earth. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, tires screeching as I spun the wheel onto solid asphalt. I pulled over, shaking, chest heaving. The highway was empty, clean, quiet, no fissures, no stains. But when I stepped out, just to prove to myself the world was still sane, I found the undercarriage dripping. Thick, red droplets spattered the pavement, steaming faintly in the cool air. And still, beneath it all, I heard that faint, steady thump. Not from the road this time. From inside my chest, matching my heartbeat. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. I sat in my kitchen, boots still on, uniform still clinging to me like a second skin, the smell of copper rising every time I shifted. I'd scrubbed the cruiser, hosed it until the water ran clear, but the stink clung in the back of my throat. I could taste it with every breath, like the air itself had soured. Around 3 a.m., I found myself staring at the county map pinned above my desk. That service road by Hickory Ridge was nothing special on paper, just a forgotten spur, a vein of asphalt left over after the state cut a new highway years back. But looking at it now, I couldn't shake the thought that it was exactly that, a vein, something feeding into a larger system. The thump in my chest hadn't stopped. At first, I thought it was just adrenaline that come down from fear. But it was there still, steady, unnatural, a rhythm separate from my own pulse. It didn't speed up when I stood, didn't slow when I sat. Just constant, like something else inside me was keeping time. By dawn, I couldn't stand the walls pressing in. I climbed back into the cruiser and drove. The highway shimmered clean under the first light, but the closer I came to Hickory Ridge, the thicker the fog clung to the trees. The world felt hushed, like sound itself was being swallowed. When I reached the turnoff, I parked on the shoulder. The road looked normal. Empty. No fissures, no stains, just damp pavement slick from morning dew. I stepped out, hand resting on the grip of my pistol, the air cool against my face. But the smell was there, faint but real, copper and rot. And when I crouched near the shoulder, brushing aside gravel, I saw it, a thin line of red almost hidden in the cracks. Dried overnight, but fresh enough to glisten. I followed it. The line wove across the road into the ditch, through weeds bent in the same strange pattern I'd seen yesterday. The silence deepened as I moved into the trees, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. Every step sank soft into soil that seemed wetter than it should have been. The drag marks were there still, deeper than before, gouged into the earth. My light caught on something pale in the undergrowth. At first I thought bone, but when I crouched, I saw it was a boot. A work boot, laces frayed, mud caked up the sides, and inside it, still laced tight, was a foot. I stumbled back, breath catching. The leg ended ragged mid-shin as if torn, not cut. My light flicked wildly through the brush, heart hammering. No other pieces. No blood around it. Just the foot, pale skin waxy, like it hadn't belonged to a living man in years. I forced myself closer, squatting low. The boot was old, cracked leather, the kind no one wore much anymore, and scratched into the heel, barely visible under mud, were 3 letters: KSP, Kentucky State Police. My throat went dry. The last state trooper to disappear out here was before my time. I remembered the stories, the search parties that combed the ridge for days, the whispers that he'd run off with some woman across state lines. No body was ever found. No trace. Until now. I stood slowly, knees trembling. The fog pressed closer, damp against my skin. That's when I heard it again. Sheriff. Not loud. Not shouted. Just a murmur, almost coaxing. It came from deeper in the woods where the drag marks vanished into the mist. I raised the flashlight, hand shaking. Who's there? My voice cracked like a boy's. Silence. Then the pulse. Louder this time, not beneath my feet, but all around me. The trees vibrated with it, leaves quivering as though stirred by breath. My chest tightened, breath hitching against the rhythm beating through the soil. I should have turned back, called it in, brought men, rope, dogs, but pride and duty pulled me forward. Maybe guilt, too. I'd spent years telling townsfolk their ghost stories were nothing but tales. Now the land itself was daring me to prove it wrong. The drag marks led me to a clearing. My light cut across broken branches and churned earth. At the center, the soil had split open in a jagged wound, and from it seeped that same red-black liquid, thick and steady, flowing upward like a spring. It wasn't a pool this time. It was a stream. The stream ran across the clearing, threading through roots and stones, disappearing into a hollow log. My light followed it. Inside the hollow, something gleamed wet and pale. Cloth, denim again. A sleeve, a hand. I gagged. My mind refused to make sense of it, but my body knew. There were more pieces here, more than one, half buried, half consumed. Faces swollen, pale, fused into the mud, eyes clouded over but wide open, and every one of them was breathing. Faint, shallow, in rhythm with the thump beneath the earth. I stumbled back, vision tunneling. My beam caught movement along the ground. The stream itself was shifting, curling, winding toward me like it knew I was there. I fired. The shot cracked through the clearing, deafening in the fog. The liquid splattered where the bullet struck, hissing against the soil. But the thump didn't stop. The breathing didn't stop. The faces twitched faintly, mouths opening wider as if to scream, but never making sound. And then, all together, they whispered, "Don't leave." The flashlight slipped from my hand. Darkness swallowed the clearing. I turned and ran, branches tearing at my uniform, lungs searing with copper-tainted air. Behind me, the ground pulsed louder, closer, until I was sure it would split beneath my feet. I didn't stop until the road reappeared under my boots, gravel crunching, the cruiser glowing faint in the mist. I dove inside, slammed the door, and locked it, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The fog pressed against the glass like hands. The pulse slowed, faded, until it matched my own chest again. And in the silence that followed, I realized something cold. I hadn't heard my own heartbeat since yesterday. I drove straight to the station and parked in back, away from the street where anyone could see the undercarriage drip. The early shift lights were already on, humming hard through dusty covers, that thin hospital buzz that makes your molars ache. Marlene was at dispatch with a mug of coffee cooling beside the console, glasses sitting low on her nose as she typed. She looked up when I came in, and her expression changed as soon as the smell followed me through the door. "Lord Sheriff," she said, pinching the bridge of her nose, "you hit a slaughterhouse with your car?" "Something like that," I said. My voice sounded hollow in the big room. I set my evidence kit on the booking counter and pulled off my gloves. "Phone the county highway supervisor. Tell him we've got a road failure on the Hickory Ridge spur. Then call the coroner, and keep trying, State. I don't care if it takes." The radio on her console snapped with a sharp crackle. It was like a match head flaring. The frequency display flickered, steady green to a quick pulse I didn't recognize. Marlene tapped the gain and frowned, leaning in. "You hearing that interference again?" Been hearing it since yesterday, I said. I popped the kit open. My hands wanted to shake, but I kept them busy. Labels, sterile vial, fine point marker. My boots left reddish-brown half-moons on the rubber floor. What am I telling them it is? She asked, my phone already halfway to her ear. Tell them they'll want to see it themselves. I paused, searching for a word that wouldn't make me sound unwell. Tell them it's active. She hesitated, a flicker of something like fear passing across her face. Marlene's worked this desk 15 years. I could count on one hand the times I'd seen her hesitate. You want Collins on? Not yet. I didn't know why I said it, only that a part of me didn't want anyone else near that road. Didn't want anyone else's name spoken from it. Try State first. I set the vial on the counter and slid my knife from its sheath. The serrations were clean, bright. I nicked the sole edge of my boot where a clotted flap hung and dark jelly oozed up like sap from a cut limb. It shouldn't have still been wet. It shouldn't have warmed the steel. I caught a bead with the vial, capped it, and felt it in my palm like a small living thing. Marlene murmured into the phone, then pulled it away, face twisting. Lines are ringing off into nowhere, no tone, just it's like it's feeding back. Try the county. Same. She set the receiver down gently as if she were afraid it would bite. You smell that? The copper was saturating the room. It curled into my lungs and stuck there. I slid the vial into an evidence bag, wrote the time, and forced my handwriting steady. 7:23, Hickory Ridge Spur. Exudate from pavement. The console popped again. Not interference now. A sound like someone clearing their throat with water in it. Marlene reached for the gain. I don't like this, she said. The sound came through the speakers like a whisper pushed through a straw. Not quite words. A sibilant, wet breath, then quiet, then a steady, soft thump. Marlene looked at me. You picking up CB bleed over? Weather? I shook my head. The thump synced with the one in my chest, the rhythm that hadn't belonged to me since yesterday. I reached to turn the volume down. The speaker hissed, crackled, and then, clear as the first time I heard it on that road, it shaped my name. Sheriff. Marlene's hand fell from the gain. Her eyes snapped to mine. Tell me you heard that. I nodded. The room felt suddenly too small, like the air had thickened a grade. Fluorescence buzzed harder, a nauseous frequency riding the electrical. I slid the bagged vial across the counter. Lock that in the evidence cabinet. We'll send it to the state lab when we get them. Don't open it. She slipped it into the slot behind her, metal door clanging shut. What do you think it is? Something coming up from under the road. I had more words, faces, breathing, a boot with a foot still in it, but they jammed in my throat. I heard myself choose the calmest lie I could live with. Maybe a buried septic, old dump stuff, who knows? Could be chemicals. Don't let anyone in that back lot till I hose the cruiser again. You should go to the clinic, she said. You look gray. I'll go after I check on Cray. The farmer who'd called it in, the first voice to say the word bleeding out loud. There was a weight to going back to him. Accountability or superstition. Maybe both. On my way out, I thought I heard the evidence cabinet tick. Just a tiny sound like glass settling. I paused, listening. Nothing. Just the buzz and the smell, thicker than before. Sweet now at the high edges like rot under flowers. I pushed through the door into thin sun and breathed new air like a man surfacing from too deep a dive. Cray's fields ran up over a low, bald hill, the grass pale with cattle bunched at the far fence line, pressed shoulder to shoulder in a way that made no sense. They had acres, but every living body had drifted to the corner farthest from the Hickory Ridge Spur, as if the land itself had a slope you couldn't see. When I pulled into his drive, there were no dogs barking, no clatter of tools, just the wind moving the aluminum of a battered barn door that never hung right. I knocked. The house gave me back my own sound. The front door was unlocked. In a county where half the folks lease under flower pots, that shouldn't feel ominous. It did. Cray? I stepped into a kitchen that smelled like coffee left to burn. A mug sat cold in a ring on the table, dark surface catching the light in a way that suggested it had been lifted and set back again, recently. When I touched it, the ring of moisture on the wood caught reddish. Something scrabbled alive under the sink. I flinched, and a field mouse shot across the floorboard and vanished behind the icebox. I let out the breath I'd been holding and called his name again. It's the sheriff. Upstairs, boards creaked. My hand went to the service weapon. Old house, old timbers, I told myself. Gravity, thermal expansion. I mounted the first step and froze. The steps weren't just creaking, there was a soft, wet sound between them, a bare foot lifting from a wet kitchen tile. I waited, breath hitched, but the sound didn't repeat. Cray wasn't in the house. He wasn't in the barns either. But I found his truck at the back gate, tailgate down, hay bales still wrapped and stiff. On the far side of the fence, the Hickory Ridge spur cut a clean black line across a shallow drainage. In the ditch below, the weeds stood weirdly glossy as if someone had painted them with lacquer, and from the lower culvert mouth a thin, slow thread of red eased out like a tongue. I measured my breaths and counted the seconds between drops. 13, 13, 13. The world had decided on a metronome and would not be argued with. When I got back to the station, Collins was in the lot, leaning against his Explorer, coffee in hand. Fresh face, 10 years my junior, a good deputy who still believed every problem had a plan-shaped hole you could file it into. He straightened when he saw my face. Marlene said you wanted me to hold off, but I got worried. You look like... He stopped, eyes dropping to the stains under my bumper. Hell. Hazmat the lot, I said. Keep people off it. He sipped, the picture of someone trying not to show he was unsettled. You gonna tell me what I should be telling people you drove through? Not yet. I reached past him and hit the wash bay. The hose coughed awake, and water hammered the undercarriage again, pink foam spiraling in the drain grate like a barber's pole. He bent to look and then stood fast, swallowing hard. It's blood. You don't know that. Sheriff. His voice softened. I know the look of it. I didn't argue because I didn't have energy for a lie. I told him to write up a general hazard notice on the spur, block the entrance with sawhorses and county tape. Tell the paper it's a sinkhole risk. He gave me a long look that said he knew I was holding back and then did as he was told, because that's what good deputies do. Inside, the smell had grown strong enough to lightheaded me. Marlene had opened the back door, a box fan fighting a losing battle. State called back, she said. They're sending a guy, but he's coming from 2 counties over. Phones are weird over there, too. She lowered her voice. The cabinet tapped again. I unlocked it. The evidence bag sat upright where she'd left it, label facing out. But the vial inside wasn't where gravity said it ought to be. It lay slanted at an angle, pressed against the plastic like a magnet to a wall. As I watched, it ticked, sliding a fraction and stopping. The bag itself had a faint blush at one corner, like condensation on the inside of a windshield. When I touched it, my finger came away red. Did you cut yourself? Marlene asked. No. I resealed the cabinet and stepped back. The thump in my chest seemed louder here, as if the whole building had become a drum. The fluorescent buzz rose and fell against it in a slow comb. I realized with the same cold clarity you get before a wreck that I had brought whatever Hickory Ridge was into town, in a plastic bag with a clean label, into my station, into my people's lungs. The radio clicked. Colin's voice should have come through, telling us the tape was up, that he'd parked his rig sideways across the spur so no one would miss it. But what came was an engine sound recorded badly, then tires on gravel, and then a voice not Colin's and not mine. A boy's voice. Breathless. Close to the mic in a way you only get when your mouth is right against a thing, he said. He should have stayed. Who is this? I said. I didn't recognize my own tone. The room noticed. Static, then another voice, older, with the flattening you hear in long-haul radio men. Road don't like being forgot. The hairs on my arms rose. I reached for the handset, and the metal was warm. Identify, I said. Identify, or we will locate the source. It's ridiculous. The little rituals of authority we cling to when we're standing ankle-deep in the inexplicable. Marlene's eyes weren't leaving the cabinet. There, through the plexi, the bag bloomed darker, the red pushing into the corners until the label floated oddly on its surface. My felt tip letters, 0723, blurred and sank as if the ink itself wanted out. I closed my hand around the key and made a decision I should have made hours earlier. "We're closing the station," I said. "Everyone out. Call in sick, call in sane, I don't care which. Lock the doors and put the sign up." Marlene squared her shoulders. "Where are you going?" "Back to the spur." Her face told me exactly how she felt about that. She tapped the edge of the dispatch console with a fingernail, a nervous tell I'd never noticed in 15 years, and nodded once like a person saying goodbye without saying the word. "Take Collins. I'll call him from the road." I lied because I didn't want him there, because the road had already said my name and I didn't want it learning another. On my way out, I passed the public notice board. The flyer for the county fair had slid under its thumbtack, curling down over the list of ribbon winners. A red crescent stained the cork below it, thin as a paper cut. No one had touched it. No one was bleeding in the lobby. I put 2 fingers to it anyway and felt warmth rising from wood that had been dry since the courthouse was new. I drove west, not east at first. There's an old guardrail turnout by the river where fishermen park overnight, and sometimes RVers who don't want to pay the $10 at the county campground ease in and pretend it's not a place to sleep. Something about that narrow strip of gravel had been needling the back of my head since yesterday. The idea that if the road was a vein, it might feed other capillaries. When I pulled in, I found what I'd half expected and fully dreaded. A Class C sitting crooked at the far end, generator quiet, blinds at odd angles, a lawn chair overturned in a patch of crushed sedge. No people. No dog. A kukri knife jammed point first into the armrest of the chair, uselessly theatrical in the way of people who think blades keep the world at bay by their presence alone. The wheel wells were wet. Under them, where rainwater should have made mud halos, something thicker had pooled and then dried in radiating lines, like the way a yolk bleeds outward in a frying pan. A rind of dark red clung to the gravel. I put a hand on the coach door. It was cold, colder than the morning. Inside, the air was sour with mildew and something else. The fridge door was ajar, light dead, a carton of eggs collapsed on the rack and fused to it. I checked the table. A map still folded to our county, a line drawn by hand from the interstate down to Hickory Ridge Spur. A circle over the little rectangle turnout where the bleeding first pooled. In the margin, where you jot a grocery list or a phone number, someone had written 2 words in a hasty, all-caps print that told me what I needed to know. Not water. I left the rig as I found it, put the note back under the magnet, and closed the door gently, the way you do with the room of someone who won't be coming back to it. The gravel under my boots crackled. When I looked down, I saw a hairline red seam running between the stones and disappearing under the blacktop of the turnout lane. It was everywhere now. Fine as capillaries, small enough to hide in the everyday, growing toward pressure and heat and interest like roots toward water. I stood there in the hush by the river and understood something in my bones. You don't hunt a river. It's a thing that decides where it goes. On Hickory Ridge, I pulled past Collins' sawhorses. They looked like a joke. I killed my engine, and the quiet pressed down thick as felt. The fog was gone, and the sun had no business making the world look normal, but it tried anyway. Blacktop, ditch, yet oak leaves bronze at the edges. I walked to the place where the blister had broken and waited, hands empty. "Sheriff," the road said, soft as a secret. "I hear you," I said, "but I'm not staying." Something under the asphalt shifted, no sound really, more like the small give of a sleeping animal when you lay your hand on its side. The copper rose, and with it, a warmth that licked my shins. In the trees not far off, something metronomic breathed. The pulse that had colonized my chest aligned, and for a second it felt like peace, like the way you find a friend in a crowd by the cadence of their footfall. "Don't leave," it said. Not a command, a plea. The voice braided. The boy, the long-haul man, the trooper who'd walked into these trees decades ago, the farmer I hadn't found in his kitchen. Maybe mine too, recorded and played back to me, my own vowels fed through gravel and heat. I am a man built on rules, on routes, on arrive and report and go home. I stepped back. The shimmer broke around my boots like the skin on hot milk. I can't keep you, I said, and you can't have me. The pulse rose, the asphalt breathed in, and from the ditch mouth a thin red line extended bright as a probe, seeking. It stopped inches short of the toe of my boot, tasting air with a soft, wet sound, then withdrew. The road went still. Somewhere a crow barked twice like a laugh. I realized then that this wasn't a hunger that could be satisfied or starved. It wasn't a predator in the sense that I've known the word. It was a system trying to correct an absence. Where we had cut a line across hills and named it a spur, something older was knitting its own network back through the cut. And it knew names, because names were lines, too. I turned toward the cruiser. Behind me, the asphalt gave a little sigh, and the smell eased, and I felt the pulse slide away from alignment with mine, until I was left with my own weak, thready beat, and the other one at a distance, like a neighbor watching from their porch while you go about your business. I was 5 steps from the car when my radio snapped hard enough to sting my ear. "Sheriff," Collins said, breathless. "Cray's boy just rolled up to the tape. Says his dad called him at sunup and told him to bring the cows in because the road was talking to him. He hasn't answered since. I'm headed to the house." I stopped. The river turnout, the RV, the cabinet bloom, the capillaries under gravel, my neat stacks of priorities slid into each other. "Don't go in the house," I said. "Wait at the gate. Do not cross onto the spur." A pause, the soft sound of someone swallowing their pride. "Copy," he said. "You coming?" I looked down at the red seam threading toward my boot and thought of the word I didn't have before. Not active, not hazard. Alive. I opened the car door and told him the truest thing I could. "I'm already here." Collins didn't answer at first. Just a hiss of wind through the radio, then the slam of a truck door. When his voice finally came back, it was quieter. "Sheriff, you better get here quick. The cows, they're not moving right. They're bunched up against the fence like they're trying to climb it. And there's blood in the ditch. Looks like it's running uphill." I gripped the mic so hard it creaked. "Stay in your vehicle, Collins. Do not step onto the road. I'm on my way." The radio clicked once, but no reply came. Just the steady rhythm of static, and beneath it, faint like a drum muffled by soil, the same thump that lived in my chest. I drove fast. Too fast for a back road slick with dew, but fear eats at judgment. Gravel spat from my tires, the cruiser rattling over every rut. When I crested the low ridge and Cray's place came into view, the first thing I saw was the herd. They were pressed so tight against the north fence that the metal posts bowed inward. The cattle weren't bawling the way they do when spooked. They were silent, their heads all angled toward the trees across the spur. Every few seconds one would twitch, as if from an unseen prod. Their eyes rolled white, but not a sound came out. That silence was worse than noise. Collins' Explorer sat by the gate, driver's door open, engine still running. I pulled up hard, gravel skittering, and called his name. No answer. I approached slow, sidearm loose in my hand. The radio handset hung from the dash, receiver hissing. His coffee thermos lay on the ground beside the tire, contents still steaming into the cool morning air. "Collins!" My shout cut across the pasture and came back thin. Something moved in the ditch beyond the fence, a shape low to the ground, crawling. I raised my weapon and shouted again, voice cracking. "Identify!" The shape stopped. Slowly, too slowly, it rose. My breath caught. It was Collins. Uniform soaked down the front, fabric clinging dark. He stood swaying, head angled too far to one side, like he was listening to the ground. His mouth opened, closed. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice. "Don't leave." The words came wet, bubbling, as though pushed through fluid. His eyes rolled toward me, not focusing, white showing all around the iris. I shouted his name again, but the only reply was that steady rhythm, louder now, pounding up through the soil under my boots. The cattle lurched all at once. slamming into the fence with a sound like thunder. Posts snapped, a section gave way, and the herd spilled into the field, hooves churning mud, not running away, running toward the spur as though drawn. Colin staggered forward into the ditch. I saw the soil darken around his boots, saw rivulets spreading like veins through the weeds. My instincts screamed to fire to put a bullet into something before it reached me. But I held, because his mouth was still moving, forming shapes my ears couldn't hold, and I realized with horror that it wasn't him speaking. It was the road, using him like a ventriloquist's dummy. I backed toward the cruiser. My chest thumped double time, one beat mine, one beat not. My vision blurred. The smell was everywhere, thick and metallic, filling my throat. I made it to the door and pulled myself inside. Colin stumbled closer, arms jerking like a marionette on tangled strings. His eyes met mine through the windshield. For one flicker, one heartbeat, they were his. Terror flashed there, human and pleading. Then they rolled white again, and his mouth stretched too wide. "Sheriff," the voice gurgled. "You're part of it now." I slammed the car into gear. Gravel spat fire as I tore back down the lane, steering wild, eyes burning. I didn't look in the mirror, but I heard it. His voice, their voices, all of them rising behind me like a choir pulled through the dirt. I didn't stop until I hit the 4-lane highway. My hands shook so bad I almost lost control. I pulled to the shoulder, chest heaving. The cruiser's frame ticked, cooling, and then I saw it. At the center of my windshield, spiderweb cracks spread outward, faint but undeniable. And from each crack, a thin red line seeped, trailing downward, slow and steady. Not rain, not condensation. Blood. It was inside the glass, running downward between the layers like veins under skin. I sat frozen, unable to breathe. My radio hissed once, sharp, then silence. And in the silence and steady, my heart answered the rhythm it had been trying to ignore. Thump, thump, thump. Not just in my chest now. All around me, in the glass, in the dash, in the road beneath my tires. The highway was bleeding. I sat on the shoulder until the sun climbed high enough to burn off the mist, but the cracks in the windshield didn't dry. The lines inside the glass glistened dark, catching the light like veins under thin skin. I kept waiting for them to stop, to clot, to seal themselves up the way glass ought to. They didn't. Every few seconds, one of the rivulets would bulge as if something beneath the laminate layer had pushed. A pulse. My pulse. The rhythm in my chest wasn't my own anymore. It was following the roads. Or maybe the road was following me. I drove back into town with the windows down, letting the wind whip my face. The air stank of copper even here, though no one else seemed to notice. People were out with their coffee, morning routines humming along like nothing was wrong. Kids waiting for the bus, a woman hosing her porch, an old man on his mower rolling slow across dew-heavy grass. Ordinary scenes. But when I glanced at the gutters by the square, I saw it. Thin threads of red easing down the storm drains, vanishing into the dark. I didn't stop, didn't call attention. What would I even say? That the pavement was bleeding? That the earth was trying to speak through us? I drove straight to the station. Marlene met me at the door, pale. "Sheriff, you need to see this." She led me to the cabinet. The vial was gone. The evidence bag was still sealed, the metal cabinet still locked. But inside, the vial wasn't floating anymore. It had vanished, leaving nothing but a wet smear of red clinging to the plastic edges. The smear pulsed faintly, as if still alive. Her voice was a whisper. I didn't touch it, I swear. "I believe you." My throat was raw. "Get your things, Marlene. Go home. Lock your doors. Don't come back until I say." She didn't argue, just nodded, grabbed her purse, and left without even turning off the lights. I stood alone in the hum of fluorescence, first staring at the empty bag. My radio crackled on my hip, loud enough to make me flinch. Static. Then layered in whispers, that phrase again, "Don't leave." I ripped the radio from its clip and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and cracked open, spilling wires like guts. The whisper didn't stop. It came from the walls. The fluorescent lights flickered in rhythm with the thump. The floor beneath my boots vibrated. I stumbled back outside into the sharp noon sun. Main Street looked normal. but the longer I stared, the less it was. The cracks in the sidewalks were darkening. Thin red lines seeped from beneath the curb. A man washing his truck across the street bent to hose his wheels, then froze. Water pooled at his feet, but it wasn't clear anymore. It was pink, swirling. He dropped the hose and backed away fast, muttering. I climbed back into the cruiser. My breath fogged the glass, though the air wasn't cold. The cracks across the windshield had spread wider, red seeped in tiny rivulets, tracing a map across the glass, a map that looked too much like the county road grid. I watched as one thin line pulsed brighter, Hickory Ridge. Then another began to glow faint, out by the river turnout, then another, cutting directly through town. The road system itself was bleeding. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The rational part of me, the lawman, the one who'd spent 2 decades filing reports, testifying in court, delivering bad news to families, was crumbling under the weight of something bigger than words. How do you warn a county that the ground itself wants them? I thought about calling state again, about demanding hazmat, CDC, FBI, hell, anyone with more letters after their name than me. But another part of me, the part that had stood in that clearing and seen faces fused with the soil, breathing in rhythm with the earth, knew it wouldn't matter. This wasn't something you contained, it was something you fed. And once it had your name, you didn't get free. I turned the cruiser away from town and headed south, tires hissing. The pavement beneath me shimmered in the heat, red bleeding faintly from the seams. Every mile marker I passed, I whispered it under my breath, a mantra to remind myself I was still moving, still separate. 23. 24. 25. But when I glanced at the odometer, it hadn't changed. Stuck at 17,006. I tapped the glass. Nothing. Still stuck. The road was holding me. I slammed the brakes, tires shrieking, gravel sprayed across the ditch. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, from the cracks spreading across the windshield, a voice. My own. Sheriff, it whispered. My own cadence, my own rasp, mirrored back at me through the veins of glass. I stared, throat locked, until it said the next words. You're already home. My vision blurred, chest tightening against the rhythm not my own. I stumbled out of the cruiser, boots crunching gravel. The asphalt beneath me was damp, red seeping through like sweat. I dropped to my knees, palms pressed to the surface, and felt it breathe. The road was alive, and it knew me. It was breathing. Not the wind through culverts, not trucks rumbling miles off. A real inhalation, a swell and collapse under my palms, slow and deliberate, like the road had lungs. I pulled my hands back, but the sensation stayed in my skin, as though it had imprinted itself. My fingers trembled uncontrollably, every nerve buzzing. The asphalt gleamed wet in the noon sun, and thin rivulets seeped outward from the fissures, curling around my boots. I stood, staggered backward toward the ditch, but the ground there was no safer. The weeds were already blackened, slick with the same sheen. It had spread. Every step I took, the earth seemed to pulse in time with me, until I couldn't tell if it was following me or if I was following it. The cruiser's radio screeched suddenly, loud enough to make my teeth ache. I spun, and the cracked receiver spat voices all at once, layered in a chaos that made no sense. Collins's tone, the farmer Cray's drawl, Marlene's whisper, the long-haul voice from the static, even my father's deep timbre from 30 years ago. All speaking in chorus, in time with the thump. Don't leave. Don't leave. Don't leave. The glass of the windshield bulged outward, veins pulsing, the map of the county roads glowing faint red. I watched in horror as the grid spread past the borders of the county, bleeding outward, shaping itself into a larger web. Roads becoming veins, towns becoming nodes, rivers becoming arteries. It wasn't just here. It was everywhere asphalt had been laid, every scar cut into the earth. The realization hollowed me. This wasn't just Hickory Ridge. This wasn't just Kentucky. It was every mile of paved road in the country, maybe the world. The veins had been cut long ago, and whatever was beneath us had been waiting. The voices hissed, grew wetter, closer, until they merged into a single word: stay. I stumbled back from the cruiser, chest pounding double time, ears ringing. My training screamed for me to retreat, to survive, to call someone. But what number do you dial when it's the land itself? The ditch behind me burbled. I turned and froze. The stream that had seeped from the weeds was forming shapes. Faces, faint and wavering, pushing up like bubbles. Pale eyes, mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. One of them looked like Collins, another like Cray, a third I didn't recognize until my knees gave. It was me, my own face in the water, eyes blind but mouth shaping my name. I backed onto the gravel shoulder, boots slipping. My shadow stretched across the bleeding asphalt, long and jagged. For one terrible instant, I thought I saw it pulse too, as if my own silhouette had a heartbeat separate from mine. The voices rose again, softer now, coaxing instead of demanding. You're part of it. I couldn't breathe. My chest hitched, the foreign rhythm choking me from the inside. I gasped for air, clawed at my shirt as if tearing fabric could free me. My knees buckled. The world spun sideways. Gravel cut my palms. I lay there on the shoulder, cheek pressed to the hot stone, watching the thin red seams crawl outward across the asphalt like veins feeding into a heart too big to see. And with every thump I felt less myself, less sheriff, less man, more part. I don't remember climbing back into the cruiser. I don't remember driving. But somehow I found myself parked behind the station, engine ticking. My hands were on the wheel, but they weren't steady. They tapped out the rhythm, unconsciously, perfectly matched to the thump. Inside, the building was empty. The fluorescents buzzed overhead, flickering faint red at the edges. The evidence cabinet stood open, the bag gone. On the floor beneath it, a smear of liquid stretched toward the door, like it had crawled out. I followed it without meaning to. Each step fell in time. My heartbeat was no longer mine to control. The smear led to the front door, across the threshold onto the courthouse steps, and when I looked down Main Street, I saw it everywhere. Thin lines, creeping from sidewalk cracks, from manhole covers, from the tar seams of the highway itself. A network spreading, pulsing, alive, and no one else saw. People walked past, chatting, sipping coffee. Kids laughed, chasing each other. Cars rolled through intersections. None of them noticed the red sheen beneath their feet, the rhythm in the ground. But I noticed. And it noticed me. The voices murmured, not from radios now, not from fishers, from inside my own breath. Don't leave. I don't know if I'm writing this down to warn someone or if I'm only confessing what I already know. I never left that road. Not really. Because I can feel it now, under every step, every mile. The road bleeds, and it carries me with it. And someday soon, when it needs more, I'll answer. Because the pulse isn't under the asphalt anymore. It's inside me. I never believed that sand could hold a memory. Dirt, maybe. Mud keeps a print until the rain washes it away, and snow will remember every direction you walked until the sun turns it to water. But sand? It should shift too easily, scatter with the wind, smooth itself over with the tide. Sand wasn't supposed to remember. At least that's what I thought before the night I pulled my RV into a forgotten stretch of shoreline campground in the Gulf of Mexico, a place that felt almost erased from maps, as though it wanted to stay hidden. I'd been on the road for weeks by then. My name's Jacob, 39, divorced, no kids. I'd picked up RV camping not just for the adventure, but for the silence. A silence I thought I wanted after years of noise. Ringing phones, arguments that never seemed to end, the kind of city life that left you swallowing anxiety just to breathe. The road had been a kind of medicine, each stop a dose of solitude. But solitude carries its own dangers, and that night I swallowed a different kind of silence, one that carried weight, one that pressed against me until I felt small inside it. The campground was barely more than a cracked asphalt loop, half buried by dunes and creeping grass. Rusted hooks stuck out of the ground where electric boxes used to stand, but most of them had been scavenged long ago. Only one other RV sat parked at the far end, a faded Class C with its blinds drawn shut tight. No movement. No sound. Just the wind and the distant rush of waves I couldn't see yet but could feel, like a constant pulse beneath the earth. I almost kept driving. something in me resisted stopping, like when you open a door and immediately know the air on the other side isn't right. But it was late, and fatigue works like a soft lie. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I parked anyway, shut off the engine, and stepped out into the warm coastal night. The first thing I noticed was the sand. It stretched in patches between the asphalt and dunes, the kind of fine, pale grit that clung to your shoes. My boots sank slightly as I walked around the RV, and I remember thinking how soft it felt, almost unnaturally soft, like flour poured too deep. It gave me a strange unease, though I couldn't name why. I leveled the RV, set out a chair, and made a half-hearted dinner. A can of chili, eaten from the pan. The other RV remained as silent as a tomb, no flicker of TV light, no sound of laughter, nothing. I tried to tell myself maybe it was just a couple sleeping or someone traveling alone like me, but my eyes kept flicking to it, even as I ate, like the blinds themselves were watching. By the time darkness fell, the waves grew louder. I walked out past the dunes, carrying my flashlight just to see how close I really was to the water. The beam caught the sand rolling out like a pale desert, then finally struck the foam of surf. The shoreline was empty, no footprints but mine. The moonlight glazed everything silver, and I stood there for a while, listening. That's when I first heard it. Not the ocean, something else, faint but steady. A sound like soft footsteps pacing somewhere behind me. I spun around, shining the light back toward the dunes. The beam only showed shifting grass and a curve of sand. No one. My own prints stretched clearly behind me, each one filling with shadow. But there was something wrong, something that made the hair on my arms rise. The prints didn't stop at the dune line. They continued past it where I hadn't walked. I crouched, holding the light low. My prints were spaced like they should be, heel to toe, but alongside them, overlapping in places, were others. Bare feet. Narrower. Lighter. Almost childlike. They trailed past the dune, away from me, into the dark. My throat went dry. I told myself maybe a kid from the other RV had walked out earlier before I arrived. Maybe the tide had preserved them somehow. I turned back to the water, forcing myself to breathe. But when I looked again, my own tracks behind me had already softened, edges crumbling, shapes fading, and those smaller prints, they were still sharp, like they'd just been made. That was the moment the silence began to change for me. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed. It asked questions without words. I walked quickly back to the RV, sand whispering under my boots. I locked the door, shut the blinds, and sat there for a long time with the lights on, staring at nothing. Sleep eventually came, but it was restless, shallow. I woke sometime after midnight to a noise that didn't belong. Knocks. Not loud, not urgent. Just 3 soft taps against the side of the RV near the door. I froze, every muscle locked. My breath caught in my throat. The knocks came again, almost gentle, as if whoever or whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare me, but to remind me they were still waiting. I didn't move for what felt like hours. When I finally worked up the courage, I pulled the curtain aside just an inch. The night outside was black. My porch light illuminated nothing but swirling sand. No figures, no movement. But below the light, at the bottom of the steps, the sand had changed again. More prints, small, bare, circling the RV. I let the curtain fall, heart pounding so hard I thought the whole camper might rattle with it. My rational mind screamed for an explanation. Kids playing a prank, wind-shaping illusions in the sand, anything but what my gut was telling me. But deep down I already knew. This sand didn't forget. It was remembering me, step for step. And something else had decided to remember alongside me. I sat awake the rest of the night, listening to the surf, listening for more knocks. They never came again. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the prints. I saw them circling, pressing down in perfect shape, like something had been walking around me in silence, waiting. When dawn finally broke, I stepped outside. The air smelled heavy with salt. My head throbbed from lack of sleep. The prints were still there, not blurred, not faded, clear as if pressed into wet cement. I followed them, careful, uneasy, my boots sinking where the smaller bare feet had stepped. They led away from the RV, through the dunes, down toward the beach, and then they stopped. Not at the tide line, not where the surf would have washed them away. They simply ended in the middle of open sand, as though whoever had made them had vanished mid-step. I turned in circles, scanning the beach. Empty. Just wind, water, and that endless blanket of pale grit. Something shifted inside me then. Not panic, not yet. But suspicion. A creeping suspicion that I hadn't stumbled into an ordinary campground. That maybe this sand remembered more than footsteps. Maybe it remembered everything. And maybe, now that I'd stepped into it, it wouldn't forget me either. I backed away from that last footprint slowly, like if I moved too fast, I'd wake something up. My breath felt shallow, my chest tight, and I realized I was holding my flashlight even though the sun was already burning over the horizon. Old habits of fear don't disappear just because the darkness does. The ocean was steady, rolling, relentless, but the sand beneath my boots felt like something alive, something that didn't belong to the wind or the tide. Every crunch carried weight, like the ground wanted to memorize me. By the time I got back to my RV, the other camper, the one at the far end of the lot, had its door wide open. Not swung open like someone had just stepped out, but gaping like it had been left that way for hours. The blinds still covered the windows. Nothing moved inside. I stood frozen, staring at that hollow rectangle of black. My first thought was to call out. My second thought, stronger, was not to. Some primal instinct rose up in me, something that whispered, "You don't want to know what's inside." I turned away, went back into my rig, and tried to push down the panic clawing at my throat. I told myself I'd leave after breakfast. Just hook up, hit the road, and put this strange night behind me. But leaving wasn't as easy as I thought. When I turned the ignition, the engine coughed once, then sputtered out. I tried again. Same thing. Dead. I cursed under my breath, checked the gauges, the battery, the fuel line. Everything should have worked. I'd driven hundreds of miles the day before with no issues. But no matter what I tried, the RV refused to turn over. And then I felt it. That same quiet, heavy presence pressing in from outside. The sense that I wasn't alone, even if I couldn't see anyone. My skin prickled as if invisible eyes were crawling over me. I stepped back outside, tools in hand, trying to distract myself with the mechanical problem. The air was hotter now, but the sand still looked wrong. Every step I'd taken to and from the beach was visible, sharp, preserved. And worse, so were the small barefoot prints, weaving through mine, circling them. They hadn't faded at all. I worked on the RV with one eye constantly scanning the dunes. Hours passed. The other camper's door stayed open, the silence inside like a black hole. No one came out. No one went in. Finally, exhaustion. I sat down in my camp chair, grease on my hands, my stomach tight with hunger and dread. I tried to eat a sandwich, but every bite turned to paste in my mouth. I kept glancing down at the sand beneath my feet, half expecting new prints to appear while I was watching. And then I saw them, not appearing all at once, but forming, slowly, grain by grain, as if pressed by something I couldn't see. Just a few inches from my boot, a toe began to take shape, then an arch, then the ball of a small bare foot, perfectly outlined, sinking deeper as though weight pressed into it. I shot to my feet so fast my chair toppled over. My sandwich fell into the sand, forgotten. My heart was in my throat, hammering. I staggered backwards, staring. The footprint was complete. Nothing stood there, nothing visible. But the sand remembered anyway. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, shoved them in my pocket, and started walking toward the open door of the other RV. If anyone was in there, anyone human, they might know what was happening. Or maybe I just couldn't stand the silence anymore. The closer I got, the stronger the smell hit me. Not rot, not exactly, more like dampness, salt, something old and heavy. The kind of smell you get when you pull open a chest that's been sealed in a basement for decades. I climbed the steps slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The door frame felt cold against my hand, colder than the air around it. I leaned in, peering through the gloom. The interior was stripped bare. No bedding, No dishes, no personal belongings, just the shell of the RV, walls yellowed with age, and on the floor, scattered across the dust, were prints. Dozens of them. Small, bare, pressed into the dust the same way they pressed into the sand outside, and every single one of them pointed toward the back, toward the narrow bedroom door. I couldn't move. My knees felt locked, my lungs hollow. The silence grew deeper, if that was possible, pressing on my ears until I swore I could hear my own blood rushing. Then, soft, almost too soft to be real. A sound from the bedroom, breathing. Not steady, not even, but ragged, shallow, like someone struggling to hold it in. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly tripped off the steps. The sunlight outside hit me like a wave, hot and blinding. I turned and ran, full speed, back to my own rig. I slammed the door, locked it, and collapsed against it, chest heaving. I don't know how long I sat there, trembling, sweat dripping down my spine. The breathing hadn't followed me, but I felt it anyway, hovering at the edges of my mind. Hours passed. The sun dropped low, bleeding red across the dunes. I forced myself to calm down, to think rationally. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the prints were old, preserved somehow by the dryness of the air. Maybe the sound had been wind in the vents. But when night came, the knocks returned. 3 soft taps, then silence, then 3 more. This time they came from the rear of the RV, then the side, then the roof. Always 3. Always soft, like a rhythm, like a reminder. I sat in the dark, every nerve screaming, like clutching the flashlight like a weapon. My rational mind kept insisting it was branches or raccoons, or even just the old metal shell of the RV expanding and contracting with the night air. But the sand outside knew better. When I finally dared peek through the blinds, my stomach turned cold. Prints. Hundreds of them. Circling the RV in perfect rings, stretching outward across the sand. All small, all bare, all sharp as if made a second ago. And in the center, right beneath my window, one set pressed deeper than the rest, as though whoever stood there had stopped walking and was still standing, watching. I dropped the curtain, heart slamming, and in that moment, denial was no longer possible. This wasn't wind. This wasn't illusion. The sand was alive with memory, and something had chosen me to be remembered. I didn't sleep that night. I sat rigid in the dark, listening as the knocks came and went, as the silence pressed closer and closer, until the air itself felt too thick to breathe. And with every passing minute, one thought burned brighter in my mind. This campground wasn't abandoned. It had never been abandoned. It had simply been waiting. When the first rays of dawn finally pushed through the blinds, my body felt like it had aged years in one night. My eyes burned, my chest was tight, and I could still hear the rhythm of those knocks echoing in my head. 3 at a time, circling, waiting. I pushed myself up slowly, every bone aching with exhaustion. The silence outside wasn't silence anymore. It was a hum, a low vibration that lived beneath every other sound, even the waves. I unlocked the door and stepped outside, bracing myself. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. The sand around the RV was carved in rings of footprints like ripples frozen in time. Hundreds of bare imprints, clear and sharp, spiraling outward until they vanished into the dunes. None of them had softened overnight. Not one. I staggered down the steps, forcing myself to move closer, to prove it was just some weird weather quirk or my overtired brain inventing patterns. But the prints were undeniable, small, delicate, perfectly shaped. And then I saw something worse. Mixed in with the bare feet were new shapes, my boots, my exact tread. Not just the paths I remembered walking yesterday, but fresh ones, stretching outward where I hadn't gone. My footprints, copied, repeated like the sand was practicing me. The world tilted beneath me. I gripped the railing, nausea rising. My prints didn't belong there, but there they were, walking paths I hadn't taken, wandering in circles I never made. The sand didn't just remember, it was imitating. I backed away, my legs trembling. I told myself I had to get out. No excuses, no more delays. If the RV wouldn't start, I'd walk. I didn't care if it took me all day to reach the nearest town. Anything was better than staying here. I went back inside, grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with water, a map, a flashlight, and whatever food I could carry. My plan was simple: follow the road until I hit civilization. The thought of leaving the RV, my safe shell, terrified me, but staying felt worse. As I zipped the pack, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A shadow sliding across the blinds. My heart stopped. I crept closer, pulled the curtain just an inch. Nothing, just sand and light. But when I looked down, a fresh set of prints, right at the bottom of my steps, small, bare, pressed so deep I could see the lines of toes. I froze, breath locked in my throat. Whoever or whatever made them had been standing there seconds ago, watching me pack. I let the curtain fall and stumbled back, gripping my backpack like a shield. My chest heaved. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. Then, from the silence, came a sound that nearly buckled me. A laugh, not loud, not joyful. A whisper of a laugh, thin and brittle, like a child's voice carried through a cracked wall. It came from outside, from the sand. I clamped my hands over my ears, shaking my head, whispering to myself, "No, no, no." But the laugh had already wormed inside me. It wasn't just sound, it was intent. Playful, cruel, patient. That was when I realized the sand wasn't simply remembering. It was aware, and it was enjoying me. I bolted for the door, yanked it open, and stumbled down the steps. The footprints were everywhere now, tangled together in impossible patterns. My own boots, 100 times over, the bare feet weaving between them, leading me in circles. I started down the cracked road, my pack slamming against my shoulders, my breath harsh in my throat. The dunes loomed on either side, the ocean's roar pounding in my ears. For a while, I managed to convince myself I was leaving it behind, that if I just kept moving, the prints would fade and I'd find my way back to safety. But half a mile down the road, I glanced back. The footprints followed. Not just one trail, but dozens, layered over each other. My boots stamped fresh into the sand, catching up to me even though I was still wearing them. The bare feet beside them, weaving closer and closer to my path. I broke into a run, panic burning through my veins. The road stretched endless ahead of me, as the sun climbing higher, the heat pressing down. My lungs ached, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. When I finally slowed, gasping for air, I looked down. The road beneath me was empty. Asphalt cracked and faded, no footprints. For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe the prints only lived in the loose sand. Maybe I could outpace whatever this was. But then I looked closer. The cracks in the asphalt, the thin lines where weeds had once forced through, were filled with pale grit. Sand, and within those veins, too small to notice at first, were imprints. Tiny bare feet, hundreds of them, stretching forward in the direction I was walking. Waiting for me. I staggered backward, nearly tripping. My throat was dry, my heart slamming against my ribs. The road wasn't safe either. The sand was everywhere, seeping in, carrying the memory forward. I turned in a circle, desperate, searching for any sign of life. A building, a car, anything. But the road was empty, the dunes endless, the other RV at the far lot now just a speck behind me. I thought about going back, but the image of that open door, that ragged breathing, locked me in place. Forward was the only direction I could handle. So I walked. One step after another, sweat pouring down my back, lips cracking in the heat. I told myself not to look down, not to check the sand. But my eyes betrayed me, flicking constantly to the ground, waiting for the prints to return. And they did. At first, just a few, scattered. Then more, multiplying with every yard. By the time the sun dipped low again, the road ahead of me was thick with them. My boots, the bare feet, all pressed deep in the pale grit, all leading forward, as if they already knew where I was going, as if I wasn't choosing at all. Darkness fell. The ocean's roar faded, and in the silence the laughter came again, this time closer, this time louder. It rose from the sand itself, from beneath my feet, until I could feel it vibrating up through my legs, into my chest, into my skull. A chorus now. Dozens of voices, high and thin, giggling in rhythm with my steps. I broke. I screamed into the night, voice cracking, begging for it to stop. My cry was swallowed instantly, the dunes offering no echo, only that endless laughter. And then suddenly, the road ended. The asphalt dropped away into a wide basin of pale sand, a hollow cupped by dunes. My flashlight beam swept across it, catching glimmers. At first I thought it was water, but no, it was prints. Thousands. Every inch of that basin was pressed with feet, some small, some large, some twisted, boots, bare, sandals, even wheel marks from RVs long gone, all etched into the sand like fossils, preserved perfectly. A graveyard of movement. I stood at the edge, trembling, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The basin was waiting for me. And I knew, deep in my marrow, that once I stepped into it, the sand would never let me leave. I don't know how long I stood at the edge of that basin, staring down into the chaos of prints. My light jittered over them, my own trembling hand unable to hold steady. Every footprint glowed pale in the beam, shadows sinking into the grooves, thousands of them overlapping, climbing over one another like they were fighting to be remembered. The sound of the ocean was gone now. That was the first thing I noticed. No crashing waves, no steady heartbeat of surf, just stillness. And beneath it, faint but growing, came the laughter again. High, brittle, like children hidden beneath the sand itself. I wanted to run. My instincts screamed it. Turn around, get away from this place, put distance between you and whatever this is. But I couldn't. My feet wouldn't listen. It felt like the sand itself had taken hold of my ankles, urging me forward. I whispered to myself, desperate, like hearing my own voice might break the spell. Just keep moving. Just get through it. On the other side, there's a road, there's people. My voice cracked. The words didn't convince me. I stepped into the basin. The sand was softer here, impossibly soft, like stepping on a flour or ash. My boots sank deeper than they should have. I froze, then forced another step, and another. The prints crunched under me, but the sound was wrong. Not the dry shuffle of sand. It was wet, sticky. I shone the light down and felt my stomach twist. My boot wasn't just pressing sand. It was pressing into the outline of another boot print, one identical to mine, one that gave way like fresh clay, as though it hadn't just been made yesterday or last week, but this exact second. The basin rippled around me, not visibly, not in a way I could point to, but I felt it. A vibration rising up through my legs, a faint quiver that climbed my spine. The laughter thickened, circling, layered, dozens of voices now, overlapping, weaving into a chorus. I tried to walk faster. Each step grew heavier. The sand clung, sucking at my boots, and with every footfall, new prints appeared beside me. Bare ones, small ones. They didn't trail off into the distance anymore. They pressed themselves into being right at my side, like something invisible was walking in lockstep. I broke into a run. My breath tore from me, ragged, desperate. The beam of the flashlight jolted, catching glimpses of twisted tracks, prints shaped like hands, like knees, like something had crawled here long ago and refused to be erased. Halfway across, I stumbled. My boot caught in something buried, and I fell hard, my hands plunging into the sand. For a second, I thought it was just soft ground, but then my palms sank deeper, too deep, the grit giving way like it wasn't earth at all, but something waiting to swallow. I yanked my hands free, my skin coated in a pale film that glittered faintly in the light. My breath hitched. It wasn't just sand. It clung like dust, like fine powder that pulsed faintly against my skin as if alive. The laughter rose sharp around me, not distant anymore, right in my ears, right beneath my hands. I pushed up, stumbling forward, the basin stretching wider than it had looked from above. My legs burned, my chest heaved, and the prints pressed tighter around me. Some appeared ahead, guiding me forward, others behind, following, and always the small, barefoot ones right at my side, as though whoever they belonged to had chosen me as a companion. My flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. Then steadied. But in those brief moments of darkness, I'd seen shapes, figures standing just at the edge of the light, featureless, their bodies no more than shifting outlines. When the beam returned, the sand was empty again. Only the prints remained, etched where those figures had stood. Panic split me open. I screamed, raw and useless, and forced myself to keep running. My body no longer felt like my own, but like a puppet pulled forward, every step written before I took it. The The basin walls rose higher around me, dunes curling inward, trapping me in a bowl of shadows and prints. The laughter fell quiet, replaced by something worse, breathing. Dozens of ragged, shallow breaths, drawn in unison as though the sand itself was inhaling. I staggered to a stop, chest heaving. My light caught something in the center of the basin. At first, it looked like a mound, a dune shaped differently from the rest. But as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't a dune at all. It was a pile. Shoes, boots, sandals, sneakers, all rotted and sun-bleached, stacked in a low hill, some half-buried it, some torn apart by time. A graveyard of steps, the remnants of everyone who had walked this place before me. My breath shook, my vision blurred. The mound seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, as though the shoes themselves still carried the memory of motion. And then, just as I dared to step back, a sound cut through the air. Footsteps. Not mine. Not overlapping, but deliberate, heavy, coming toward me. I swung the light wildly, heart seizing, but saw nothing. The steps grew louder, crunching into the sand until they stopped just behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The air at my back thickened, pressing cold against my neck, colder than the night air should have been. Then something exhaled, right against my ear. I bolted. I don't remember choosing to. My body just launched forward, tearing across the basin, stumbling, clawing at the sand. The prints erupted beneath me, filling in before my boots lifted, like the ground was racing to catch me. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but terror carried me farther than strength ever could. The mound of shoes fell away behind me, the basin walls beginning to thin, the dunes opening to a narrow break. I lunged for it. My shoulder slammed against the sand, and I clawed upward, dragging myself through the gap, tearing my palms raw. And then I was out. I collapsed on the far side, gasping, my chest racked with sobs I didn't know I'd been holding. The laughter was gone. The breathing was gone. Only silence remained. But when I dared glance back, shining my light over the basin, I saw them, the footprints, every single one I'd made, and beside them, always, the small bare feet. Still walking, still following, even though I was no longer inside. The dunes stretched before me like a broken ocean, endless ridges rising and falling, their slopes pale under the thin moonlight. My lungs still burned from the sprint out of the basin, but I forced myself up by stumbling forward into the night. I didn't dare look back again. I already knew what I'd see. The prints, pacing alongside mine, fresh no matter how fast I ran. The memory of them clung to me like a second skin. The sand was softer here, shifting under my weight, dragging at my boots. Every step sank deeper than the last, and it felt less like I was climbing a dune and more like the dune was swallowing me. Sweat stung my eyes. My pulse pounded in my throat. I tried to pick a direction, any direction, but the dunes stretched identical on every side. North, south, east, west, just pale ridges under a vast black sky. No landmarks, no stars. Even the moon seemed to flicker, vanishing behind thin clouds as though it wanted nothing to do with this place. I walked. Then I stumbled. Then I ran. The sand slipped away beneath me, and the dunes seemed to shift, curling inward no matter which path I took. And all the while behind me I could hear it. Footsteps. Soft, dragging, perfectly timed with mine. I whipped my light around, swinging it wildly across the ridges. Nothing, just sand. But then I noticed the ground beneath my feet. My prints stretched in a jagged trail behind me, but they didn't end. They overlapped, crisscrossed, doubled back. It wasn't just recording where I'd walked. It was rewriting it. I dropped to my knees, panting, staring at the mess of imprints. Some were mine, fresh and sharp. Others were copies, distorted, stretched at impossible angles. And woven between them were the small, bare feet, always there, always pressing deeper than they should, as though something heavier than a child had made them. The air thickened. The silence pressed down again. And then, knocks. 3. Soft, deliberate. Not on the RV this time. Not on wood or metal, but from beneath me. The sand under my knees shuddered faintly, just enough to stir the grains, just enough to let me know something was alive beneath it. I scrambled to my feet, terror coursing like fire, and sprinted blindly into the dunes. My flashlight beam jolted with every step, catching glimpses of shifting shapes at the edges of vision, silhouettes standing just beyond reach, gone the second I swung the light toward them. The laughter returned, faint at first, then growing, threading through the sound of my own ragged breath. It wasn't playful anymore, it was hungry. I crested another dune and nearly collapsed when I saw it. Light, not the moon, not stars, but an actual glow, faint and yellow, pulsing through the darkness. My chest heaved with relief, my legs pumping harder, dragging me down the slope toward it. As I got closer, the shape of a building emerged. A shack, weather-beaten and half-buried in the sand. Its windows leaked a dull yellow glow, its door slightly ajar. I didn't think. I didn't question. I just lunged for it, slammed the door open, and stumbled inside. The air was stifling, heavy with the smell of rot and salt. My flashlight beam swept across cracked walls, warped wood, and a lantern flickering weakly on a table. The glow I'd seen. But the shack wasn't empty. The walls. They were covered in prints, not painted, not carved, pressed. The wood was warped inward, each board molded with the impression of feet, hands, knees, as though hundreds of bodies had pressed against it over and over until the walls themselves had remembered. I staggered back, my stomach lurching. My light caught the floor. The sand had risen through the cracks. It was moving, slowly, subtly, like a tide pushing its way in, and it was already carrying footprints. Fresh ones. My boots. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut before I reached it. The lantern flickered, the light dimming. The air grew colder, and then the breathing started again. Not around me, above me. I lifted the light slowly, dread choking me. The ceiling sagged under the weight of impressions, faces pressed into the wood, eyes bulging, mouths stretched wide as if gasping for air. Their shapes shifted, grinding against the planks, the wood creaking under the strain. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. Hands, dozens of them, pressed from the wood into me, their grooves sharp, clutching at my shoulders. My arms, my spine. I screamed, tearing free, bolting to the door. It wouldn't budge. My shoulder slammed against it once, twice, until finally it gave, and I spilled out into the night, sand cascading down around me. The dunes were moving. I swear it. Their ridges shifted, collapsing, reforming. The basin wasn't behind me anymore. The road wasn't ahead, just dunes, stretching infinite, curling inward as if to swallow me whole. And in every valley between them the sand glowed faintly. Not with lantern light this time, with memory. I could see the prints from where I stood, thousands of them, layered, twisting into spirals and circles that stretched farther than my eyes could follow. Some were fresh, some half-buried. But all of them were alive, pulsing faintly with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The laughter rose again, echoing across the dunes, but this time it wasn't behind me, it was inside me. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, sobs racking my chest. My flashlight slipped from my hand, beam rolling across the sand, and in that moment I realized the truth that froze me more than anything else. It wasn't following me, it wasn't hunting me, it was becoming me. Every step I took, every print I left, it was learning, copying. My boots stamped a path across the dunes, but already dozens of others had stamped the same path, trailing just ahead, just behind, perfectly timed. The sand wasn't chasing. It was rehearsing, preparing for the moment it wouldn't need me anymore. I don't know how long I knelt there in the sand. Time lost its meaning in that endless night. My chest heaved, my hands trembled, and the world spun in circles. But the ground beneath me did not stay still. It pulsed, subtle, steady, like the rhythm of a hidden heart. Each thrum stirred the grains, filling my footprints, erasing them, and then pressing them back into place. Sharper, cleaner, as though sculpted by unseen hands. I staggered to my feet, swaying, staring at the trails spiraling out into the dark. They weren't random anymore. They weren't just the record of where I had walked. They were patterns. Deliberate, curling into shapes too vast to comprehend, sigils etched into the desert itself. I followed one with my eyes, a circle looped with jagged lines, the kind of shape that prickled something primal inside me. It wasn't drawing maps, it was writing names, and mine was the freshest. I snapped my gaze away, refusing to let the thought my survival depended on movement, on breaking free of this place, no matter the cost. My legs obeyed before my mind could argue, pushing me into another run across the dunes. The night seemed to lengthen with every step. The moon never shifted, frozen overhead. My flashlight dimmed, its beam narrower, weaker, though I'd changed the batteries just hours ago, and each time the beam flickered, I caught movement in its dying edge. A figure. My figure. Running just ahead of me. The first time I thought it was a trick of exhaustion, but then I saw it again, shoulders hunched like mine, flashlight swinging like mine. It stumbled the same way I did, tripped over the same drift, gasped with the same ragged breath. It wasn't a reflection. It was an echo. I shouted at it, a raw, desperate sound that shredded my throat. It didn't answer. It didn't even turn. It just ran on, mimicking me, beating me by half a second, as though rehearsing the very ground I'd tread. I veered left as sharp as I could, throwing my weight into the sand. My double veered too. Not after me, before me. The dunes rippled, shifting under its phantom steps, and when I stumbled forward again, my boots landed square in its tracks. The truth clawed at me. I wasn't leading. I was following. The laughter swelled, weaving with the rasp of my breath. I spun, desperate to find the source, desperate to see something, a child, a shadow, anything I could name. But the dunes were empty, only the sand, shifting, remembering. I stumbled onward until my legs nearly gave last, until my throat ached from sucking in cold night air. And then, at last, the dunes parted to reveal another structure. This one wasn't a shack. It was larger, sunken half into the sand, the remnants of what might once have been a ranger station. Its roof sagged, its windows shattered, but its walls stood stubborn against the weight of time. Light glimmered faintly inside. Not lantern light this time, something colder, steadier. I should have turned away. Every cell in me screamed not to repeat the mistake. But exhaustion overruled fear, and before I knew it, I was clawing at the warped door and stumbling inside. The air was stale, heavy with dust. My flashlight beam danced across cracked linoleum floors, overturned chairs, peeling maps pinned to corkboards. And at the center of the room, a desk still stood, its surface buried beneath layers of sand. On top of that sand, something had been arranged. Shoes. Boots, sandals, sneakers, hiking shoes. Dozens of them, lined in neat pairs, some half-buried, some pristine as though just set down. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stared. Every pair was filled, not with feet, with sand, packed tight, spilling grains through the cracks. And in the far corner, one last pair waited. Mine. My boots, caked with the exact dust I'd been dragging for hours, laces frayed in the same place, heel worn in the same angle. Identical. My legs locked, my lungs seized. I staggered back against the wall, but the wall betrayed me. Its surface cracked, splitting open with the groan of stressed wood. Sand poured through the gap, spilling like water, pooling at my feet, rising up in little heaps that took shape as toes, arches, heels. Footprints forming upward. The laughter returned, louder, closer. It wasn't in the dunes now. It wasn't in the walls. It was in the boots. The pair in the corner shifted, filling with more sand, tightening into shape. I watched in paralyzed horror as the laces drew themselves taut, knotting neatly, the weight of the thing inside pressing down onto the cracked linoleum. It lifted one foot, set it down. The sound was soft, deliberate, a perfect knock. Then another, and another. I bolted for the door, adrenaline overriding reason, but the sand moved faster. It surged across the floor, rising into ridges that caught my legs, slowing me, dragging at my boots. I tore free, crashing through the warped door, spilling back into the open night. The dunes had shifted again. The ranger station was already sinking, its roof tilting, windows vanishing beneath the flow. And across the nearest ridge, my double waited. It stood still this time. No more half-second lead. No more echo. Just standing, flashlight in hand, beam glowing steady and strong, while mine flickered uselessly in my grip. I froze, breath tearing from my lungs, unable to move, unable to blink. It lifted its light, shined it on me, and in that glare I saw its face. My face, but not tired, not broken. Its eyes were wide and hollow, its mouth twisted into something between a grin and a grimace. Its skin wasn't skin at all, just fine grains clinging together, slipping and reshaping with every shift of the wind. The dunes pulsed again. My heart matched their rhythm. And I understood. The desert wasn't trying to kill me, it was trying to keep me. Every step, every breath, every drop of sweat I'd shed had been taken, recorded, remembered. I was already part of it. The body in the dunes was nothing more than practice. The real Jacob, the last fragile version, was standing here, trembling, lungs aching, and when I collapsed, the desert would be ready. I don't remember dropping the flashlight. 1 second it was in my grip, beam trembling over the dunes, and the next it was gone, swallowed by the sand, sputtering once before vanishing. The only light left was the one my double carried. It stood on the ridge, holding it steady, the glow painting sharp edges into the night. I should have run, should have hurled myself into the dark and never looked back, but something held me rooted. Not fear, not exhaustion, recognition. That thing, whatever it was me. I thought of the footprints, the spirals, the patterns etched into the desert. The dunes weren't just recording where I'd walked. They were teaching something to walk as me. And now the lesson was finished. My double tilted its head, slow and deliberate, as though curious about what I'd do. Its grin widened, lips parting, but no teeth shone inside. Just sand, grinding softly with every breath. The sound sickened me. It wasn't like listening to a body breathe. It was like listening to the desert itself drag across my chest. It stepped forward. I stepped back. My heel slipped in the shifting slope, and I nearly toppled. The desert caught me, not to save, but to keep me from getting too far. The grains seemed to rise against my boots, pressing, holding, nudging me back toward the ridge. I shook my head violently, whispering through a dry throat. No, you're not me. You're not me. But the desert didn't care what I believed. The double's flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing square on my chest. My own shadow stretched long across the dunes, bending and twisting like something alive. For a second, I swore I saw it detach, stretching farther than it should, crawling toward my double's feet. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, not with words, with my voice. A half-second delay, like a bad recording, but it was mine all the same. Every breath I'd drawn since stepping into this wasteland, every broken sob, every curse whispered under my breath, it repeated them back, strung together into one endless stream of sound. I collapsed to my knees. The desert shook with it, or maybe it was just me trembling too hard to know the difference. I thought of running. But where? Every direction circled back, every footprint ended in a spiral. No escape. I thought of fighting. But how do you fight yourself? How do you throw fists at something made of the sand you breathe, the dust you carry on your skin, the memory of every step you've ever taken? The desert shifted again, the dunes rippling like water. My double came closer, slow, patient. The ground trembled under each step, and every vibration carried through me. And then I realized something. It wasn't trying to kill me. Not yet. It was waiting. Waiting for me to collapse, waiting for me to give in, to surrender my weight, my breath, my story, waiting for me to let it finish what it had started when I first set foot on these dunes. That thought burned through the terror, sparking something raw and defiant in me. No, I rasped, forcing myself upright. My legs quivered, but I locked them beneath me. You don't get to decide. You don't get to keep me. The desert didn't laugh this time. It listened, and for a flicker of a second, I thought maybe, my voice had weight here. Maybe my will could push against whatever rules this place obeyed. But the double didn't falter. It raised its flashlight higher, blinding me in its glow, and for the first time I saw what hid inside its hollow eyes. Not sand. Faces, flickering, faint, half-formed. Men and women, old and young, lips frozen in silent screams, eyes stretched wide. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, layered inside, trapped in the hollow of its skull. The desert didn't just remember. It collected, and I was next in line. Something in me snapped. I lunged forward, a wild, hopeless motion, no plan in my head except move. My boots slammed into the slope, sand giving way beneath me, my body colliding with the double. It was like hitting stone. No give, no warmth, just the grinding scrape of grains locking together. My fist struck its chest, sand spilling from the impact before sealing again, shape refusing to break. I clawed at its face, but the grains slipped through my fingers, reforming faster than I could tear. It didn't fight back. It didn't need to. All it had to do was wait. My body grew weaker with each swing, every blow swallowed by the desert itself. The sound of my struggle joined the chorus spilling from its mouth, my voice repeating back to me, broken, delayed, endless. Finally, my strength failed. I collapsed against it, forehead pressing into the cold grit of its chest. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe this was the end, that the desert would seal around me, fold me into its collection, erase the last of Jacob like it had erased all the others. But then something happened. The dunes pulsed again, the same steady rhythm I'd felt before. And this time, I matched it. Not out of surrender, out of rebellion. I forced my breath to steady, lungs burning, ribs aching. I matched the desert's rhythm, but I made it mine. My heart hammered with it, not against it, and slowly, I felt something shift. The double wavered. Its grin faltered, its body shuddering, grains slipping free faster than they could reform. The faces in its eyes flickered, straining toward me, mouths opening wider, eyes pleading. I staggered back, drawing in another breath, louder, deeper, steadier. "I am not yours," I roared, voice cracking, but heavy enough to echo off the dunes. The desert shivered beneath me. The double raised its hands, sand spilling from its fingers like smoke. Its flashlight flickered once, twice, and then sputtered out, plunging the world into true dark. I stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched, surrounded by silence. And then, the dunes exhaled. A rush of wind tore across the landscape, lifting sand in great spirals, erasing every footprint, every pattern, every spiral. My tracks, my doubles, the sigils carved into the earth, all gone in seconds. The desert forgot, and in that forgetting it released me. I fell to my knees, sobbing into the cold sand, unsure if I'd won or merely been spared. The silence pressed heavy around me, but no laughter followed, no echoes of my voice. Only the desert, empty again. I don't remember how long I knelt there, sobbing into the cold sand. Minutes? Hours? The desert doesn't measure time the way we do. It only keeps what it wants, our weight, our voices, our fear, and it forgets the rest. When I finally lifted my head, the sky had shifted. The stars were sharper, colder, like shards of glass pinned to a black sheet. The moon had tilted lower, brushing its pale light across the dunes, and there were no footprints. Not mine, not the doubles, not the spirals. The desert had erased everything. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over, that whatever trial I'd endured had ended with the wind, and now all I had to do was walk, and I'd find my way out. But then the silence pressed in again, and I realized, this place doesn't end. You don't leave the desert, it leaves you. I forced myself upright, legs trembling, and picked a direction. East, maybe, or west. It didn't matter. Every way looked the same, and for once that sameness felt almost merciful. No spirals, no doubled steps, just sand. I walked, and for the first time since stumbling into this nightmare, I felt almost human again. My chest rose and fell with my own rhythm, not the desert's. My shadow stayed where it belonged. My voice, when I whispered a ragged prayer, didn't echo back in mockery. I kept walking. Hours passed, I think. My throat burned with thirst, cracked, but I didn't stop. The desert didn't speak again, it only watched. And I told myself that was enough, that silence meant survival. But then I crested a dune. And there it was, the RV, my RV, sitting at the base of the slope, half buried in sand, headlights dark, windows reflecting the moonlight like blind eyes. I froze. My knees buckled. Relief and terror collided so violently in me that for a second I thought I'd vomit. It was impossible. I had walked away from it hours ago, days maybe. Yet here it was, right where I'd started. The desert doesn't let you leave. It circles you back. My breath hitched. I forced myself down the slope, boots sinking deep, heart hammering with each step. Maybe it was real. Maybe this wasn't a trick. Maybe the desert had toyed with me long enough and was finally spitting me out. I stumbled to the door, grabbed the handle, yanked it open. Inside, Darkness. The faint smell of coffee grounds and gasoline. My own mess, my own clutter, blankets strewn across the seats, maps folded on the counter. Everything was just as I'd left it. The floor. Sand, thick and heavy, covering every inch. My footprints trailed through it, leading straight to the driver's seat. But I hadn't been inside since this began. My chest tightened. I followed the prints step by step until I stood before the wheel. The driver's seat was occupied. By me. Or what was left of me. A husk, skin cracked and brittle, lips caked with sand, eyes wide open and full of grit. The body slumped forward, hands fused to the wheel, as though frozen in the act of driving straight into the storm. I staggered back, my shoulder hitting the wall. A strangled cry tore from my throat. It wasn't just a double the desert made, it was a grave. I shook my head, whispering to the dark, "No, that's not me. I'm here. I'm still here." But the desert doesn't argue. It doesn't need to. The body didn't move, didn't fade, didn't shatter into sand like I expected. It just sat there, endless, permanent, a memory carved into the RV itself. And then I heard it again, the laughter, faint, distant, carried on the wind outside. Not cruel this time, not mocking, just patient, like something waiting for me to understand. I stumbled back out of the RV, gasping for air. The dunes stretched endless around me, their edges silver in the moonlight. My footprints trailed behind, circling the RV in a neat spiral. Of course, it wasn't the desert that had been circling me. It was me, circling myself. The realization gutted me. Every choice I'd made, every step I'd taken, had only ever led me back here. Back to this truth. The desert doesn't kill you. It remembers you. And in its memory, you never leave. I fell to my knees, sand filling my palms, pouring between my fingers like time itself. I wanted to scream, to curse, to beg. But what good would it do? My voice would only join the chorus of echoes trapped in its hollow skull, another sound swallowed by dunes. So I did the only thing left. I closed my eyes. I let the sand press against me, cool and endless, as though the desert were holding me, waiting. Maybe it had been holding me all along, and as the wind rose again, erasing the last of my fresh footprints, I felt the desert settle into its rhythm, steady, patient, eternal, and my heart matched it. If you ever drive through the Mojave and see an RV half buried at the base of a dune, don't stop. Don't look inside. Because if you do, you might see me still sitting there. Or worse, you might see yourself.